now we're I'm not just a pretty face, Chief.
Just the
I know,
astute
well, you
corner
are a
over
pretty
here.
face, but
You're more than a pretty
you're
face.
there, that and then some.
Uh-oh. Yeah, that's what, now I'm worried. Now-
Okay, now we're ready. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Tricia informed me that Wendy had another,
Last-minute conflict.
so she will not be in attendance. Okay, so let's call to the public.
I don't think we have any public here, sir.
Okay, thank you. Approval of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the minutes as presented of April 25th, 2017.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 5, open dialogue and review of information previously presented and questions. Chief Kasian, do you have anything you'd like to offer?
No, I don't. I'm really here as the shell answer man for you. If there's any questions from previous meetings or anything that wasn't clarified that you've thought of since our last meeting or whatever, we're here to answer.
I do have one question. Chief, and I was hoping Bob would be here, but maybe between the staff. After Bob's presentation last week, I kept thinking about what, everything seemed to be, or most of the items on his list seemed to be pretty high priority and important, and yet he indicated when I asked him the question, because we're so far behind, because the system is so antiquated, and we're literally, doing the eBay parts gig here, is, don't we want all this right now and get it installed as soon as possible? And the answer that I think he gave was, no, I want to wait in certain areas several years from now because technology might change and improve again. Well, that's always going to be the case. And if we're so far behind, don't we want the sooner the better to get our communications and everything up and running, and knowing that in 10 years we're going to do this again?
So yes and no. The key piece is staffing and capacity for systems to be installed and updated, upgraded. Contractors are busy. We have a customized system that if you were just to replace some parts in updated fashion, you have to know where everything is plugged in, how it's plugged in. You just can't have a vendor come in and install it like you would a commercialized, designed, off-the-shelf program system. So Bob and his staff believe they can phase these in appropriately while still waiting for the technology to catch up on some things or advance in other areas so that he can install and get these things in line, balanced the whole bit. And as Bob noted, that off-the-shelf design systems, tens of millions of dollars. And Bob is still trying to maintain the cost ratio piece of sustaining the system and do so by engaging in that customization.
So Bob and you are comfortable that since we're going to phase this in over several years, that you'll be able to keep the current systems and the eBay parts train alive and well for those years until we have time to fix it?
Am I comfortable? No. Well, I don't think Bob's comfortable, nor am I, that the system will be balanced and always on the 5 nines, which is 99.99% reliable. Add another 9, that's 5. And that's the golden key of sustainability and reliability in any sort of communications networking system is the 5 nines. The challenge is the cost. And my preference would be if we had the money to put in a system that is balanced, redundant, and up to date, and has all those components. But that's $25 million, and that's a lot of money. So the best next alternative is to have Bob and his team work at best pace, keep the redundant links alive as they can through the efficient purchasing process that they utilize, as well as update those areas that they can to increase the life of some of those systems. So primarily the primary links would be updated first, the secondaries would be brought up, and the tertiary ones would be brought up then. But that's his plan.
Any other questions or comments of the committee? Okay, let's move on to item number 6, general overview of construction cost estimates for the station projects by Core Construction. Chief Kazian?
So, Mr. Chair, we've got core construction here. We'll have Seth that'll be making the presentation. We have Nicole, and we have Ileana. I know it's a cool name. And so they'll be making a presentation. They've done some time, spent some time walking through the stations, understanding the projects, the scope of what we're looking at doing. They've taken some of the drawings that LEA has done for station number 4, things like that, work with the engineers. So they'll explain the process they went through, and they'll be looking at providing an estimation of what we could be considering as part of our projects before us. So with that, I will let them take the mic, and we can have one more for the committee member who's absent. Actually, I need 2 more. We have 2 committee members, just Pat and Wendy. Okay. So I will turn it over, I guess, to Core Construction and let them take it. And all we ask is if you guys, we'll give you a mic, and if you can make sure you're talking the mic so the viewing public can watch it at home and they can hear you. That's the only way we ask. And if you do talk from the audience, if you can grab that mic and use that one. And you can walk around with it if you like, or whatever you want.
How many people does it take to push a button? I saw the light.
Oh, do you have to hit F5 or something?
Yeah, I did already do that.
She still
Should be
pinching the windows for you?
You just duplicate and see what that is here.
Oh, yeah.
It does. She still works. That's good. Good.
I handle all the money and
That's right.
I don't know anything. I'm like, it's all yours.
Perfect.
How's the
So the other,
store doing?
we could
Good.
use a jump drive for this computer.
Chief,
Can we try that? Do you have
it's an
PowerPoint
MEP
by chance?
system.
Actually increasing
Stand by, committee.
most
Yeah, what is it?
actually most of our stuff is through the mail. I mean, their customers are all customers, but they're not.
Did you get that?
What do you have? What's the latest? You send me a picture.
It's weird, it's not showing up.
Pull this.
No,
They're higher than ours. They're not.
I remember back in the day.
you still should have the,
I was allowed to have
yours wasn't up on the main screen, that was it?
I still remember.
Was?
That was so fun. Everybody waiting for
So I wanted to ask that, because I was gonna ask some of that, and he answered. And his question, because I was thinking, well, why wouldn't we just set a piece together, but it's still exactly, and we're still just, why wouldn't you just throw all of it at it?
Well, that was,
You know, replace things.
I have one, thank you, Darren. And I'm still not totally convinced. I mean, I get that you can't buy a package that costs 25 million. But yeah, it seems like if we've got a antiquated repeater on the Schnebley, you buy brand new repeater, you drive up there and install it. Or if there's, in order to make that work, you also have to install a second repeater somewhere Mingus got on the, on the other side. Okay, then you buy 4 of them and you install them all at the same time. So that the, yeah, I think it is. I think what I got maybe is that it's a function of, and I think maybe ask talk to Chief Ty a little bit too, but because it's such a custom system, you can't
Cool. All right, committee, I think we're ready. Sorry about the technical issue there.
install it. He at least
Hello again, guys. I'm Nicole Kotzer with Core Construction, and I'm here today because we were asked to collaborate with LEA and help provide a responsible conceptual construction number for your potential bond budget. So we have done that, and now today we're here to present. And so I brought a couple people with me that will best be able to do that. So I have Ileana. Ileana's been with Core for almost 10 years. She's in our pre-construction department. Seth Beer, about the same amount of time, and also in the pre-construction department. And James Freya, back in the blue shirt, he's one of our senior project managers. And all 3 of these Core employees have done mostly municipal work, and all 3 also have fire experience. James is actually currently on the Daisy Mountain Fire Station project and admin. And so I think that, Seth and Ileana are going to speak to the costs and to some market trends, and then we'll have time for any questions that you guys have, certainly. And then if you have a question that James can answer, he'll definitely be able to provide a different perspective. So I'll let them take it away, and thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to address you this morning, and it's really an honor to do so. As Nicole said, our objective is just to share really with you some of our history in terms of projects that we've completed all over Arizona and in the country. And what that's done is it's taught us a lot about the process of building fire stations. And so I hope that the information is valuable to you today as we share it, and obviously it's just a starting point for the next steps that you guys are about to embark on. So thanks again for the opportunity to share with you. Ileana and I both have worked with Core for almost 10 years. We both led fire station projects through the pre-construction process. And so it's been really part of what we have done in our career. So I want to start with just an agenda. We're going to tell you a little bit about Core, just so we can give you some context as to what our experience is and really what our expertise would be to come and talk to you about this today. And then talk to you specifically about the stations that we have at hand, the 2 renovation projects and 2 new build projects that are under consideration. And we want to talk, as part of that, we want to talk through part of what our process is to start from a spot where we don't really have a design, which is where we are today, and be able to come up with a competent idea of what the construction costs would be. And then third, to address some of the project risks that would be associated with this particular project, and just make you aware of some of those things, and then finally leave you with some next steps to consider. So with that, we'll dive right in and tell you a little bit about Core. We have offices in 8 states, 17 offices scattered throughout the country. So we're a national contractor, but we are headquartered in Arizona. So we work out of the Phoenix office is our national headquarters, and so we do a lot of work all over the state of Arizona. Mostly in the public sector, whether that's a municipal project such as this or in the education space, higher education or K-12. As we zoom into Arizona, we have 6 offices throughout the state. Our main office is there in Phoenix, but we also, James is working really out of our Flagstaff office right now, and and across the state, we've also served a lot of various fire clients, and that includes fire departments and fire districts like yourself. And so that's been our experience throughout the state of Arizona. So all of that has led us to really a repertoire of projects across the country. We've built 40 fire stations, and here in Arizona specifically, we've built 17 fire stations. And I would mention that all of these fire stations were built with a qualified qualifications-based procurement process. So that would be a construction manager at risk, or as what is called CM at risk, or design build. The vast majority of them CM at risk, which we'll talk a little bit about what that process means and a little bit more about that. I think 3 of these fire stations were design build. The rest were CM at risk, and we haven't built any hard bid fire stations. So with that, let's dive right into that. That was really more to set the groundwork for the fact that we've been through this a few times in terms of fire station construction, and obviously that doesn't mean there's not lots to learn on every unique project, because just like these projects that are before us are extremely unique projects, and so everyone has its unique intricacies, but we can learn a lot from the experience that we've had. And so when we start in a situation like this where we don't really have a design complete yet, we have a needs assessment that's been done, we have some scope that's been identified, but there's a lot of work to be done between now and when a project's fully designed. The way that we approach putting together a responsible conceptual estimate starts with leveraging our historical data. So all those fire stations that we've built, one of the great benefits of that is to catalog and carefully keep together those historical costs, broken down very specifically, so that we can measure them against each other and look at the differences between each specific project. So I want to show you a document that might be a little bit hard to read from where you're sitting, but we call this our 10-group study. And what this document is, and each column represents a different project. And so we pulled 6 of our projects that we felt were fairly relevant or recent to start to compare against these projects. And this has a lot of information in it that's really valuable to us. So obviously we have a total cost. We have square footages, so they range here. You can see the first one on the left, the Pine Top Fire Station, was 12,700, and the next one, the Superstition Fire and Medical Station, was 5,460 square feet. So big difference in square footage, similar to the 2 new proposed stations that we have here at Sedona Fire District. And so what we have is we break every project into what we call our 10 groups, and that starts with demo, site work, rough, site work finish, structure, enclosure, interior finishes, and on down through, I heard MEP systems referenced earlier. That was mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, and special systems. And so the purpose for that is to keep everything, the scopes, nicely organized into these groups, so that when we look at from project to project, we can start to observe trends in what drove costs on different projects, right? So these things aren't cookie cutter, and different clients have different priorities in their projects. So as you start to look across the row, you can see where some projects spent more on finishes, some spent more on MEP systems, and there's various reasons for that. And this allows us to start diving in deeper. This sheet can be expanded into individual scope line items like drywall or masonry, and we can even get granular to look at those. So that's really helpful for us when we approach a new project that's just at a conceptual stage. It gives us a lot of history to look and to say, where would we be knowing this particular project's complexities and the different priorities that are on these specific projects? What project would most align in each of these groups? And that can help us to really narrow down the project into a pretty good estimate of what it would take to build it. And so that's really helpful to us to go through this process. You can see I circled here the dollar per square foot, and I just wanted to mention briefly as we look across these different numbers that are here. One thing to be aware of when you're thinking of construction cost is not everybody shares the same definition of cost per square foot. because it can be looked at a lot of different ways. You can break out just the building, the bricks and mortar. You can, so you can leave out some of the site components, or you can leave out special systems or furniture. And the way we always look at it is what we delivered to our clients, which in almost all of these cases was considered a turnkey project. So what I mean by that is we did everything from demo the project and abate hazardous materials all the way through to constructing the project, fitting the project out with special systems, data, AV, furniture systems, all the furniture. So a lot of our fire station clients have basically said, we'll put the toilet paper rolls on the holders, but everything else we want to be there. And so that's what these costs really represent. And we'll kind of go through some things that aren't in these costs, just so we're clear about that when we're talking about costs. But we look at it as a comprehensive approach. And so just be aware of that as you think about dollars per square foot, or you hear dollar per square foot quoted. So these are the real results from some past projects here. So with that, though, I will mention that these projects were all built in various years, right? And obviously costs haven't remained stagnant. So these costs are adjusted for what we've seen the market do from a cost trend standpoint. And there's a very specific way that we do that. We don't just take a guess at it, but the second part of determining what a project would cost today in these station cost projections is adjusting for current market conditions. And so this is something that we do a lot of research into, and we use different cost indexes and different studies that are out there that are available, as well as we measure it against our own experience from day to day as we're working through these processes, right? But you can see here on this chart on the left, the National Cost Construction Index has gone up from 145, and this is just like an index that's rooted in at some point. I'm not sure what the initiation date is, but from 145 to almost 180, I think it represents a little over a 22% increase in the last 5 years. That's from a national standpoint. To be honest, Arizona's been hit even a little bit harder. We took a harder hit in the recession in terms of our construction employment. In 2007, there was 360,000 construction workers employed in the state of Arizona. In 2011, 2010, so just within a few short years, that dropped to about 110,000. So significant drop. And then obviously things have been picking up since then, and the market has become busier, and it's caused a variety of different challenges in the market that we're observing. One is the fact that all of that labor left, and now there's a lot more demand for construction and a lot less qualified labor. So that's a challenge throughout the state and really throughout the country, but Arizona in particular, because of that massive hit in construction labor that we took. And so we track this quarter by quarter. You can see the graphic on the right is a Phoenix specific metric that tracks the escalation by quarter. This is over the last year, even into this current quarter. And fortunately, it looks like it's tailing off just a little bit. But we've seen a pretty steady 4.5% to 5% increase over the last several years in construction costs. And from a general contracting standpoint, the majority of that is outside of our control. We just, we're observing what the material markets are, the vendors and the subcontractors and the labor markets. And so those things reflect themselves in our subcontractor pricing. So we keep track of that. We also are constantly getting hit with announcements from our materials vendors, et cetera, price increases. This is on framing. This is on gypsum board. This is a notice from a steel contractor. These are all from the last quarter of 2016. And so these come regularly. Whether they come to fruition or not, it plays itself out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But we're watching this stuff. And so I just want to make you aware of it as we're going into this project, that things are very different than 5 years ago from a construction cost standpoint, and that's just part of the reality of the market that we're in. I don't think it's escalating out of control, but it's been a pretty steady increase over the last few years. So that's something that we take into account when we then approach putting a conceptual estimate together for a project like this, right? So we look at how should we adjust the past projects that we've done in order to get them in today's dollars. And that's not a perfect science, but we do our best to try to make that fit. And then secondly, if we're looking at these projects, what do we believe costs are going to do between now and when these projects may be a reality, following the trends that we're on. So we do our best to try to judge that so that we're not in a spot where we underestimate it, or we just recklessly are too conservative with our assumptions as well. We try to hit that right in the middle. So that's really the second part. So we leverage our historical data, we adjust those things for existing market conditions and look towards the future. And then I'll let Ileana take over here in terms of the third step in putting together these numbers.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk more about the specifics of your guys' projects. We have toured several of the stations. Our team, Nicole, James, some of the other people that work with us on a lot of our fire projects. And so we took the needs assessment that was done by LEA, and we really just started to study particular things that jumped out at us from the assessments. Noticing that ADA was a big issue. The lift at this is station number 1 and renovation. LEA had done some preliminary concept drawings, and so we took those drawings from them, and this is what we call our detail quantity takeoff, and we use a program called on-screen takeoff for that, and it allows us to really take what is given to us being a conceptual drawing, no wall types, no notes, and really just kind of draw in assumptions from our historical knowledge of these projects. And so taking these drawings that were provided by LEA, knowing that ADA was an issue, we're including things like the replacing the lift if it's not working, restroom remodels because they're not ADA accessible. Some of these have different levels on the first level, and so there's a lot of stairs, and maybe we want to convert some of that to ramps and different things that'll allow us to get through the stations easily. And so what we do is we really just kind of quantify in detail everything that is being shown to us on this drawing as far as renovation goes. So we have the admin piece of renovation.
I'm sorry, you really need to speak into the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because our system doesn't pick up well.
Okay.
You can take it.
Does it
Sorry.
come out?
There we go.
Sorry. So walls, carpet, a lot of the upgrades that you guys were talking about wanting to see with this station in particular, we detail quantity takeoff everything that was shown here. And so these are just some examples of how we would quantify all that. This was a site diagram that was provided, maybe wanting to do a new storage and maintenance facility on the same site adjacent to your existing station, maybe replace some of the paving. These are all options that we can talk through in the CMAR process and working through some of the pre-con on the job. This is station number 4, and this would be the demo and rebuild, it sounded like, from the assessment that was needed. So we took the other concept drawing that LEA provided. We did the same thing with this, detail quantity takeoff, and that's the second floor. Here's some structure, and as far as detail on the site, plants, everything that would encompass that project. So that's an example of just how we would take what we're given from the assessment and architect's drawings and really just quantify everything in detail. That information would then feed into some other tools, detailed takeoff, an estimate back sheet, and all of that arrives at this conceptual estimate range, which is what we've given you and you've seen. This looks at the same format as our 10-group study, but these are your stations. And so you'll see from the left, you start with station 1, and then station 3 is next, station number 4, and then station number 5. And we really wanted to separate the information so that you could analyze it and discuss priorities and organize your, how you guys want to approach this. And so you can see it's the same 10-group study format. So you've got your MEP systems, your finishes, all the way through. And then at the bottom here, we've given you some ranges in cost. And you may ask, what's the low-end range versus a high-end range? High-end range will really be all of your hopes and dreams and wishes all into that project. It could be, bifold doors, which can get expensive. A low-end range could give you some of your standard overhead doors, maybe. There's just some differences there, and some risks that come in when you're at such an early conceptual stage. There's a lot of factors that go into this, that haven't necessarily been vetted through yet. So that's part of, you'll see the renovation projects are on the lower cost per square foot range. We're not having to provide a whole new structure and start from the beginning. And then you'll see as we get into station number 4, demo and rebuild, the cost per square foot can range from $370 to $412 on that one. And then the smaller station number 5 is where you'll see that cost per square foot go up. You just don't get as much economy for scale. But this is an area where, perhaps if you wanted to combine station 4 and 5 into kind of almost one project, one contractor, you could really see some benefits there, I think, with managing both projects, and leveraging your subcontractors and the materials that they're providing, and get some savings that way. So these are your stations in particular, and what we've studied, what we've analyzed, and what we're seeing in the market today as far as costs. All of that is our process and how we arrived at these conceptual numbers. I do want to talk, though, about specific risks with your stations. Station number 1, for instance, there are a lot of ADA issues, and so, how deep do we want to get into that? And do we want to provide a full elevator? Or, those are types of things that can affect some of those ranges. Plumbing and electrical codes. If we get into some heavy renovations and the electrical isn't up to code, do we have to replace everything in the whole station? Those are some of those risks that come into play when you're talking costs. Station 3, for example, another one was ADA. You've got 3 different levels in that station, and so how do we get the correct ADA access throughout that facility? Structural was a big one on this station. The roof is deflecting quite a bit. What is it gonna take to fix that roof deflection? Is it gonna take just adding some structural onto it, or is it going to take some removal, replacement of things? Those are some of the risks that come into play when talking through costs at such an early stage. And station 4, for example, you've got some grade differences there, pretty significant. We noticed some easements going through that property. How does that affect building over easements, and who's involved in that process? Existing underground utilities, and what's the material of those? Is it going to require some abatement, some transite pipe? Is there, what's underneath that ground that has to be investigated still to really understand all of the cost components that go into it? So those are some of the risks that we're seeing just with some of your projects in particular. One thing we do want to mention is just understanding overall project costs. These we've been showing you costs for just construction. There's a lot of other components that go into when you're looking at an overall complete total project cost. Design and engineering fees, those are not included in some of these numbers that we've been providing. Material testing and special inspections, those are things that need to be considered. Geotechnical surveys and permit fees, tapping fees, development impact fees, all those things need to be considered as an overall project cost. Pre-construction fees, if you need a traffic signal, and is that gonna be a part of your contractor? Is that gonna be a future item? The dispatch and alerting device systems, we will typically provide the rough-in for it, meaning the infrastructure, the conduit. And a lot of times in our experience, fire districts have a vendor that they like to work through, or, they have a contract separate from construction. And so those are other items to be aware of that you'll have to factor in your overall project cost. Temporary housing is another one. If you're demo and rebuilding a station such as Station 4, what's it gonna take for some temporary housing to make sure that the whole system isn't down, during construction. And so, in our experience, we recommend using about a 10 to 15% factor on top of the construction costs for a lot of these items, and that usually will help cover it. FF&E is another one. There's just several items that need to be thought about in the process. I'm sorry, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So a lot of the desks and chairs and all those additional things that maybe aren't always thought about needing. Anything that's not built in.
The FF&E,
Go ahead.
the FF&E falls in within that 10 to 15% that you said to add on
Yes.
top of?
Yes, I mean it depends. You know, we've had it in our contract before because a lot of the fire station components, such as the dormitory beds, the wardrobe lockers, and the desks in the dorms, a lot of times, you know, we can provide that. Every district is different. You know, if you want us to provide that, we can in these turnkey numbers, or you can have that as a factor on top, separate. Go ahead.
So, just another quick question. So, in looking at your total low-end cost and your total high-end cost, based on this information here, then should we be adding in an additional 10%, $1.2 million, since it looks like that's the number that's being used in the scoring sheet? So should that actually be another $1.2 million added to that number?
So yes, our numbers that we have presented today have FF&E in the turnkey construction costs. 10 to 15% above that will pay for your architect, your engineers, your geotechs. So yes, you would need to add that on top of the costs that we've presented today.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
On your handout here,
Uh-huh.
on Station 1, you make a note, it says additional scope for $1 million, which is the maintenance in the storage building.
Correct.
Why is that separate under the consideration that in order to do the admin side, we kind of lose the maintenance base? So wouldn't that be shouldn't that be integrated into that price?
Yes, let me go back to this. Oh, this one. Sorry. Gosh. This was an item in the assessment that I wasn't exactly sure if it was a requirement. It was an adjacent building that was existing, and it was talked about kind of an additional item that may or may not be necessary, and so we really just wanted to provide that as an additional scope item because it was really hard to analyze costs on fire station number 1 renovation and cost per foot with a new build, a demo and a new build. So we didn't want those numbers to be skewed, and so we kind of pulled that out as a separate added item. If you wanted to go ahead and add that in, then you would add 1 million to that total.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
And committee, that allows us the option to look at that as a consideration, and maybe there's a different alternative for our maintenance needs that would be cheaper than to build a new building or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you wanted to add some space at an existing station or fit out one of your existing spaces for that. Go ahead.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, speaking specifically for Station 1, but are the various things, are they modular, meaning could the board ultimately say we want to do the maintenance facility in that end, and then, but not some of the other stuff, and then maybe we want to do the troops quarters and make that a little bit more livable? You know, can we pick and choose, or is Station
Yes.
1 Station 1? If you choose to do it, you have to do it.
So all of our costs that we've presented are separate costs for each station. If you combine things together, I think you'll get some better pricing on that and some better leverage. If you obviously are doing a completely different scope and a different location, those numbers are going to change. But
Well, I guess maybe I didn't ask my question correctly. What I'm anticipating is that perhaps there are priorities, say just for this station, the higher priority may be troops quarters and maintenance facility, and giving Chris a brand new office may not be quite as high a priority. So can we pick and choose what the higher priorities are?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's the just to chime in here. I think that's the the central point of the process is it's all about figuring out what your priorities are. In fact, that's the very next part of the next steps, I guess, is addressing that very thing. Let me go forward here. So the first thing here is to verify priorities, and that what that means is that whether that's even a project, whether one of the projects is deferred to the future, or in the renovation case, like you said, what are the most important areas? And obviously, as we touch a project, there's always things you uncover that at times you have to address, right, from a code standpoint, and once you get into a project. But as we would work through pre-construction, or any CMAR contractor would work through pre-construction, that's part of the process, is assigning costs to various priorities so that you can put together a collective scope that actually meets your desired outcome for the project. And with the go ahead, Chief.
So if I
Yes.
could also further that point, when we began to just talk with LEA a little bit about some of the different concepts and considerations for Station 1 specifically, do we put a conference room here? Do we put a hallway here? Do we do this? Do we do that? We realize that the footprint of the building affords us a lot of opportunities. Where the actual design and final desire would be to what it would look like, maybe slightly different than what that is. It was just kind of more today. What does it look like today? Conceptual. But if we decide, like you said, that admin's just going to have to be as functional as it is. But the efficiency at station on the operations side really needs to change for X, Y, and Z reasons. Then we certainly may decide to just do half the building. The concerns would just be breaking those projects up into smaller projects and say, well, in 2 years we'll do the other side. There are a lot of efficiencies for us to be able to say, hey, this is where we want to be and what we want to do, and it makes sense to do it all together because of this, that, or the other thing. And those roads, we've not gotten down those roads yet. This is more of, hey, if we could do it all, here's what it looks like, and we can scale and prioritize.
I think it's also important just to kind of reiterate, this is very conceptual, what we've provided today, right? No design yet. This also includes room for contingency and escalation. So FF&E, contingency, escalation, all of that. And so it's a conservative number and very conceptual. So certainly want to stress that enough. We haven't, you can probably continue, but just so, and to kind of make sure you guys understand that what these costs really do include, because there are other fees that Ileana explained that these don't. But maybe we can kind of just go over that one more time, because I know that's what everybody's concerned with.
So one question I do have, when you talk about the contingency items, so you look at the contingency as placed on the station, Sedona station projects, they're all about a 10% contingency is what we're
Right.
starting with.
Right.
In your 10-group study, the numbers are considerably lower. Is that what they ended up using in contingency, or is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so typically by the time that we get to the process of getting to a guaranteed maximum price, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, we typically enter a new construction project with about 2.5% to 3% contingency. A renovation project, at times it's a little bit higher than that. And what that does is it affords the opportunity for there to be those things that you always uncover on a project that are the unknowns. They're not things that were included as part of the scope, which is clear, but the things that can't be seen ahead of time, just to provide a little bit of buffer. And all of that information is tracked in an open book format, just like all the other costs, which I'll explain in a minute. But so the reason that we would have 10% early on, why?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say. The reason why we start with 10% is because we're at such a conceptual level. As we would get into, there's different phases that we like to discuss through design. Schematic design is very conceptual. Design development would be the next stage, and that's getting into more of the wall types and details and elevations and all those things. As we get through those phases, and the final step would be construction documents, 100% final drawings, all the details are done, all the design and engineering has been done. As we work through that process, that contingency would fall from 10% down to maybe 5%, then back, as we get to construction documents would be around the 2.5% and 3% for construction. But that allows some flexibility with design and things that you guys are seeing, maybe the first concept didn't quite catch all the things that you were envisioning. And so that contingency allows us a responsible number at the get-go to allow for some of that flexibility.
So is the numbers are fairly close, is the low end range basically without the contingency, and the high end range is adding the contingency in, or no? Because the numbers seem to be fairly close to those numbers.
There's 10% contingency in both. However, we did scale, like I said, with the high end and the low end range. Really, there's kind of a 10%, I'd say, difference that we'll see depending on level of finishes and depending on different things that you guys want to see and what we've seen vary throughout the stations. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say when we say high end and low end, don't receive that as a connotation of quality. That's not at all what it is. It just represents different priorities. So some districts or departments will have that one station that is the one station they're going to build for the next 50 years, and it becomes sort of an icon of the community. And others are growing districts and being fiscally responsible and showing that in the design is an important thing. So there's different priorities for different clients, and that just represents itself in different building costs ultimately. And there's different site challenges that are unique to each project too. So those things.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. So let me continue on here just with this next steps, and then we'll have time to circle back and ask any questions that you guys have. And again, like Nicole said, this is all conceptual. Our desire to come here is to share with you things that we've learned in our perspective. This isn't prescriptive. This isn't saying that this is represent, especially in the renovation. There's so much flexibility in what you choose to do from a scope perspective. I just want to make sure you guys hear that our perspective whenever we approach a project is that the client decides ultimately. The client decides what the budget is. The client decides what it is that their scope priorities are. And then it's the job of an architect and a CMAR team to come together and to make those things a reality. So the next steps in this process are to verify priorities. And what I mean by that is to look at the information you have before you that we've provided and that others have provided and start to verify what the priorities are for the next steps going forward. And that could include minimizing scope in certain areas and maximizing others. That's really up to you in the next steps of this process. And then, of course, as we go forward to continue to inform the public and achieve consensus on the approach that is being taken here in the community. That's an important part, especially if there's a bond to be passed. That would be part of the next step. And then lastly, to identify the correct procurement method. And so this is kind of the last thing I'm going to talk about. And as I highlighted at the beginning, the vast majority of our experiences in the CM at risk or construction manager at risk world, and that seems to be sort of the industry standard around the state for building these fire stations. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what that looks like. I'm going to refer to it as CMAR, that means construction manager at risk, and talk a little bit about that process. So what is CMAR? It's a project delivery system, and really the goal of it is to meet the owner's big picture outcome in a manner that brings best value. And what I mean when I say best value is what is the best way for you to spend available dollars in a way that meets your vision for the project, right? That's when you achieve best value. And do that through a collaborative team-based approach. And so I think the key too is that collaboration starts not after the design is complete, but rather at the very beginning of the design, so that there's an opportunity to influence the design through the process. And that's what makes CMAR really special in that way. The team includes the owner, contractor, architect, and engineers, and then sometimes key subcontractors as well. And those people are involved from the very beginning. So there's an opportunity for everybody's expertise to influence the process. And just to be clear, in a CMAR scenario, the owner has a contract with an architect, and then they also have a separate contract with the contractor, the construction manager at risk. So the architect and the contractor don't have a contract with one another. And in our experience, actually what that creates is a healthy tension when you hire the right people, because there's a respect for for each role, right? The architect is hired to maximize the design opportunity for that particular project. And the contractor is brought on board to help keep that in line. So it creates kind of like a tension there that is actually a very healthy thing throughout the project, and I think makes us all better, makes the design better, and it makes it more accountable to the cost through the process. So that's really one of the great benefits of CMAR. It really forces this great teamwork. And so this little image kind of represents with the red circle being Sedona Fire District's big picture outcome, the white circle being all the tools that the design professional and engineer bring to the table, and then the gray circle being the CMAR that's at the table. And when you combine all the unique tools that and expertise that each of those parties have, that's really where the big picture outcome is achieved and done with best value. Yes.
Quick question.
No problem.
At what point is the architect brought on board, and at what point is the CMAR
Yeah.
brought in?
So it really varies from project to project. What we've found works the best is often the architect's brought on first, and there's a process of programming or of sort of conceptual design that begins. As early as the CMAR can be brought into that process, a lot of times they're back to back, and then sometimes there's a little bit of a gap there. But definitely by the beginning of what's called schematic design, which is where floor plans are starting to take shape. Once you get into schematic design, things get locked down pretty quickly, and the ability for the contractor to speak into the situation to affect it in a way that avoids making mistakes that cost too much money starts to diminish. And so as early as possible would be my response, but the architect is almost always hired first.
So if you could elaborate, when an architect makes a mistake, is the word you use.
Yeah.
I'm not sure as a mistake is they design things in a very architectural way that looks great on paper and things like that, but a lot of times from the construction side,
Right.
you can find things that maybe won't work real good or aren't necessarily needed, but they design it that way. And so that's that tension that Seth
Exactly.
talked about, that creates a nice synergy. Like, hey, you don't really need to do this, this, and this. Well, it's gonna look really pretty, and I'll get an
Right.
award for that. That's nice, but this is we're trying to get this project done for the best value, and that's where we've built this before, we've done this, we understand this, versus I got a piece of paper and I can
Yeah.
draw anything, make really pretty.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really expensive to build that. Couldn't we just do this? So that's
Right.
that relationship
That's
that
right, Chief.
CMAR will really create. And Station 6 was built on a design, bid, build concept, which is an acceptable practice. That's what a lot of people do, right? I mean,
Right.
but it creates some opportunities where the schematics are done, the drawings are done, the thing is done, and now we're gonna go to do this hard bid, and the contractors go, well, this is what I have to bid on, this is what was drawn. Man, this is expensive, we don't need all that, but I can't not bid on it, because that's the way the bid process
That's right.
goes. So we avoid all of those things, and we can get right down the crux of it. Here's what you need, here's what we're trying to do, here's how we can do it and do it practically. And that's where there's potential
Yeah.
considerable savings in a CMAR arrangement.
And when we've got the synergy, the healthy synergy, who decides when those two can't? Does he?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the client always decides, in our view. But we try to manage our projects in a way that create healthy tension. We love, but at the same time, we typically when we're teamed with a good architect, we're all going for the same thing. We want the client to be satisfied overall, and that means that we love great looking fire stations. We just want to help them to be built in a way that makes the most economic sense, right? And help options be considered along the way, so that everything's put on the table, and as a team there's a decision made that has cost as one factor, but also the ability to maintain it, the durability of it, the constructability of it. Does it impact schedule? Does it have a long lead time? Those are factors that are considered as we're walking through those various options.
You answered that question. You said something about, in your view,
Mm-hmm.
this is how it should go. To me, that raised a red flag. I think that's something the chief needs to possibly be aware of in architectural, that this synergy starts before he puts pen to paper, to where they know that if the two aren't getting along, who makes the final decision. I just caught that and just wanted to make mention of that. I'm sure you will, Chief, but there's got to be somebody that makes the final decision. Is it going to be the board or is it going to be you when they are not getting along?
Yeah, and typically that would be the fire chief or the team or whoever's in charge of the project at the agency, not the board typically, unless we're talking about large dollars and things like that. But the does a door go here, a door go there type of thing would be at our level. The you know, having built 2 fire stations now, one here at Station 6 and one in my former life. And I say built, I didn't really do any of the building, but was part of the process, if you will. You know, we built one in Illinois that had this beautiful 2-story foyer, a walk up to our training room, beautiful from the street at nighttime with the lights on. It looked great. I got to tell you, on a hot summer day, that room was, you know, like an aquarium without the water. And the contractor is like, I don't know why you'd ever build this way. This is terrible. I'm like, well, you're building it. Why didn't you say something? He goes, that's what the architect designed. We did a design, bid, build, you know, and so it related an opportunity for me, a flag, if you will, to say, wow, we've and then take Station 6, which was 8-10 years in the making. That was already in a design, bid, build mode. I mean, I don't know. I suppose we very well could have changed that whole process, but Station 6 was its own animal as well, based upon the dynamics of how that went through almost a decade of iterations and everything else. And so when the board said, go, let's build this, let's go, we already had pen to paper, I think about 3 times. It seemed to make a lot more sense at that point to not change the course of action, so to speak. And, you know, we learned a lot of things here at Sedona Fire through that process, and I would definitely be recommending we go through a CMAR process going forward. In the Station 4 model that we have designed in some pen to paper, in some very more generic, you know, can the shoes fit in the shoebox type of concept I kind of talk about. It's a very tight site. There's a lot of restrictions. We had to know that because there were other options we were considering, and we needed to know, do we need to exercise those opportunities? Do we need additional land? Do we need to have different land? Things like that. So that's why we've engaged at the level we have to today, where we actually have a footprint and some conceptual ideas. Will that be the final? I don't know. We would engage, and as Seth said, normally we're kind of butting up against those 2 right away, bringing in the contractor. So I'm very excited for the CMAR process and any of these projects we go forward. I think it's the right way to go. And at the end of the day, I think we'll have a far better station that's built with more practicality in mind and efficiencies in how to build them. I think much better. So
Yeah, Chief, I think you touched on a really important, you know, point there is in that design, bid, build method, you don't get the contractor's feedback early on that constructability piece. And really that's I think the biggest advantage in bringing us on so early is when we see things like you were explaining that foyer and that entrance and all that. One of the things that we I think do a really great job at is identifying those items and providing you really good options, which you'll see in a moment, an example of what we've done on a previous fire station, and I'll let Seth get into that.
And so if I could just, before you hit that next one, sorry.
No problem.
So typically, how does a CMAR get chosen? You go into another bid process, if you will, to get to choose a construction company? Because there's not a guarantee at this point that Cora will be
Sure.
the
yeah.
CMAR part of the
course.
C.
Of course. Yeah, so the process is typically there's a request for proposal or request for qualifications issued publicly, and then any contractor that meets the qualifications that are in that request can respond in a written form. And sometimes the contractor is selected off of the proposal that's submitted, and other times that list of contractors is what we call shortlisted to a smaller group that are then brought in for interviews, so that you can kind of get a feel for the people that you'd be working with from an interview standpoint, and then you have the freedom to ask them any questions as well. But all of that is the statute that allows this procurement method requires it not be based on cost, because at that point before the design there's not anything to to provide cost to in a responsible manner. But what the process then, I kind of want to walk through then the process that shapes up after that, just to give some confidence that cost is an important factor in this whole thing. I mean, it's the most important factor in a lot of ways. And so I want to talk a little bit about just what the process is once that CMAR is selected based on qualifications, and then starts engaging with the design team at those early stages. These are kind of the next steps, and I'm going to describe sort of how we approach it at Core, and I think it would be it might look a little bit different with other construction managers at risk, but this is sort of the type of process that they would engage in. But we jump into a process we call the living estimate, and the reason we call it that is because if you look here, this represents the time on the bottom axis and detail on the left-hand axis, and I don't know if you can see the yellow line there, it's a little bit dim, but it represents sort of a design progress, right? We start at a lower level of detail, and over time it grows to a high level of detail until you have a completed set of construction documents. And along the way, there's these milestones at programming and schematic design and design development and construction documents, and then you get a permit on those. And those are milestones that are built into the design process that the architect then has certain deliverables to deliver. And what we love to do is instead of like waiting around until a design gets to a milestone and then price that and react to that, we want to engage like this, where we're going back and forth with the design team on a constant basis. We call it the living estimate, providing a high level of detail in our estimate while the detail in the design is growing, so that the owner and as the architect, our assumptions on what we're pricing are always clear and open book, and you can see every item. And then what that really avoids is this scenario where you get to a schematic design estimate, and then your design slows, and there's some redesign to kind of react to the news because it's the first time the contractor has seen it. And we want to be ahead of that in a really active relationship, so that our estimate is constantly iterating, not just at a few set milestones through the process. So that's the first thing. And really, this early stage is the critical time to achieve best value, like what Ileana was pointing to. The opportunity to influence those foundational design elements is really important to getting the best cost. The second thing is the ability to provide options. So like in your atrium example, what were some of the options that would have been considered? Well, you don't know unless you go through that exercise. And so that's an important part of the CMAR's role. And this is an example of like what we call an options study. When we encounter a decision point, like for example, what type of skin system should we use on the fire station? Well, we want to put together like a comprehensive study of what that would look like. This is on the Florence fire station, where we compared 5 different potential skin options, and we looked at different aspects of it, and then put together costs related to each of those based on a very conceptual model, and then end up with some recommended or some exterior dollar per square foot assembly cost, and that helps to inform a decision that leads to the direction on the project. And so that's just one example of what happens typically multiple times during a pre-construction process, where we provide a professional deliverable to help make decisions that lead to best value. The next thing is qualified subcontractors. Now this is like where we're getting to, is there ability to maintain high level of competition and good pricing during this process? The first thing is you want qualified subs, right? You want subs that are able to build the project, that have the financial wherewithal, that they're not going to go under during the project. That's really important, that their level of quality is high. So we go through an extensive pre-qualification process where we put subs through a process to be pre-qualified. And it's typical of really any CMAR will do this, but it's to manage the risk of the process. But that doesn't limit the ability for a high-level competition. So on our pre-qual list, we have over 1,400 subcontractors in Arizona. So there's still a tremendously high level of competition. It's just that we vetted that competition to make sure that it's not people that are going to tank our project or pose a risk.
And since we're up in northern Arizona, probably most of your pre-quals are down south. Will you then readdress that and see about including people up here to see if they fit?
Absolutely. So we work all over the state, and local subcontractors are a huge benefit, not only to the community, but also in the sense of if it's right in their backyard, often they have very competitive pricing, right? So typically on an approach like this, what we would do is have a subcontractor fair in the neighborhood or in the community as the project's getting closer, and we'd publish that typically in trade journals and in newspapers, et cetera, so that there's an opportunity for the local subcontractor community to come and learn about the project, learn how they can be part of the project, and get pre-qualified. But I would say between our Phoenix subcontractor base and our Flagstaff subcontractor base, there wouldn't be a big issue covering this area of the state.
How long, if I was a drywall guy here in northern Arizona and am not currently pre-qualified, how long would it take me to get qualified?
I think it can be a few days.
As soon as they get their information filled out with their financials and all of the basically the whole packet filled out, I think most it would take is maybe a week. So it's pretty quick. It's
Yeah, and we don't restrict anybody. Like we'll give them documents to bid even if they're in that process. It's just whether or not we would choose to move forward with them, and that's a discussion with the whole team too, right? So if there's a contractor that's particularly favored, that's obviously in all of our processes, the client speaks into that process.
There's always a question whether or not, how we're gonna allow local contractors to be part of the process. And so, while I think we always want an opportunity for local contractors, we can't make a preference for those by state statute. At least what our lawyers told us. And we really want the best value, for the end product, because it's, that's an interesting balance we always have. But everyone always asks, why didn't you use a local contract? I know a buddy that could have done that for cheaper. It doesn't exactly work that way.
Right.
There's a process, and there's a reason there's a process, and things like that.
Yeah.
And so,
In the pre-qualifications, it actually is based on a state statute for this procurement method. It's not something that we just invented. It's actually a requirement of the process. So, yes.
It just seems that traveling subs, traveling from the south, add more cost depending how long their piece of the project is.
Right.
That means traveling, housing, everything else for their personnel, and they've got to factor that in, correct?
Yeah, often that's the case. Although we don't control all those variables, so how aggressively a subcontractor pursues a particular job is a little bit of a black box in terms of how they come up with what they go really aggressively at from a competition standpoint. And so sometimes we'll have out-of-town subcontractors that are really competitive costs. Now, what that does is it raises a flag for us to say, okay, did they include all the scope correctly?
Right.
Do they understand the requirements of the project? And that becomes a process of working through meeting with them, and even meeting with them as a team, and making sure that especially the key subcontractors, that everybody is comfortable with moving forward with the selections that we've made. So I think in general, local subcontractors absolutely have a leg up. Sometimes, like maybe in today's market, there's enough work for local subcontractors at times that their prices are higher because their capacity to take on more work is lower. So there's a lot of variables to that equation, but in general, you're right.
so in a design, bid, build, or hard bid process, is it different? Because in there, you give me a price, it's gonna cost you X amount to build a station, you get the contract, and whoever you get underneath this, we don't really have any knowledge of that. Is it similar, or is it different?
You're saying from your perspective as a client? Or?
Yes. As a
Yeah.
client, yes.
Yes, it is, in the sense that we value your input in the process, and the process allows for qualification-based selection. And so in a scenario where we believe, from our experience with the subcontractors, that there's a contractor that's more qualified, that's not the lowest cost, that would be where we would bring you into the loop and lay those reasons out and decide as a team whether that's a good move. And that could involve interviewing those contractors. We have the freedom to do that through the qualification-based selection, right? So that is different than hard bid, in the sense that in a hard bid scenario, you get a bid from a general contractor, you have no idea who the sub tiers are.
Or say.
At all. And they're not, and there's no requirement for a pre-qualification process, which means that your kind of fly-by-night contractor could come in And, you know, I'll just speak into this situation since you brought it up, because the reality is, you know, we all kind of understand the hard bid, design bid build world, and that is that with high competition, what you do is you lower your margin of profit going into the job and have to make that up on the back end in some way. And so that's not to say that you can't do that in a way that is above board and full of integrity. But the challenge is to maintain all of the things at one time: quality project, maintain the owner's best interest, and team with the architect in a way that doesn't set you on a course that's just trying to exploit their drawings so that you can have a change order. That's a hard thing to balance. And so we just see it very simply from a CMAR standpoint. We earn a fee, and that's published. That's part of the negotiation, is there's a fee. And then our entire world becomes about making it a good job for the client, because the only way we're going to be able to have the opportunity to earn another fee in the future is to do a really good job and have them talk about it as well. So there's that aspect of it. And then the other part of it is we go at risk at the end of this estimating process, and you've heard the term GMP. That means guaranteed maximum price. By the time the design is done, before construction starts, there's a guaranteed maximum price. And what that does is it basically is us saying, based on what's designed, and actually the contract language says based on what's reasonably inferred from the contract documents, we will deliver this scope for this much money and no more. And so contractually, that obligates us to know exactly what the design is intended, not even what's drawn there. But if there's a sink that doesn't show a hot water line going to it, clearly it's intended that it gets a hot water line. And that's under the CM at risk's responsibility. And that's part of the at-risk part of it. And so that's the beauty of the process. Our job then becomes to manage the project efficiently so that we protect the fee that we've negotiated with the client up front, and then do as good a job as possible to be able to have the opportunity to do a project again in the future for either this client or another client. And so it totally changes like the motivation as you go into the project, and is one of the reasons I believe that it created such a successful string of projects, public projects throughout the state. And one thing I would mention is it's a high level of transparency. So going into a construction project can feel like, like a black box of things happening. And what we always want to do is create a situation where everything is always shown in the same way. So our estimate format looks the same from the very beginning. And you see in this column, there's description, base price, previous estimate, and variance. So that's something that we want to do on every estimate, is show you what it was last time you saw it and what the variance is. So if dollars went up in earthwork, we're accountable to then tell you why, right? Our previous estimate was inaccurate because of this reason, or this scope changed in the design. And this is all through the design process.
That's part of that living estimate back and
Right,
forth.
right. But we want to be accountable to that and be able to show always what's happening so that everything's open book. And by the time it gets to the contract phase, the GMP means then we're locked in, and then all the costs are open book from that point. So you see what the sub costs are. You see into this situation. You see how we use that contingency. Everything's open book. And so there's just a high level of transparency. This is the type of sheet where we have multiple subcontractor bids, and we put the scope on the left-hand side and start to compare all of those bids to make sure we have everything covered. And here's an example of that in real life, where we have, I think, on this earthwork job, a crazy amount of 11 bids, and are able to evaluate all the scope on those bids. This is a little bit of an extreme example because we normally don't have that many bids, but it's a good example to show the level of competition that still exists in this process, right?
Well, we get the benefit of having a whole team doing all that work instead of one general trying to figure it all out. And this isn't a real new concept. It may be new to the board at this time, but Station 6, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, this concept with Perlman was brought to, and it was just a wonderful idea, although we didn't get it done at that time, and later on it got done design, bid, build. But the concept is great, and I encourage this board to look at this because it's an amazing process. And when we're worrying about dollars, this is gonna help us save the dollars despite the fee of hiring them because of all the work they're gonna do for us. So I'm all in favor of this CMAR process. Just wanted to get on the books with it.
Thank you. And the last thing I would say, I'm just wrapping up here in 1 minute, but the last piece of this process is that guaranteed maximum price I talked about. And I just want to make sure that we understand together what that means. And this is what it means to us at CORE, that there's no surprises. We don't get to the end of the process and it's like, I wonder what they're going to come in to the meeting with. It should be a foregone conclusion by the time we reach that point in the process. There's no change orders. That's not a thing that exists in our world, other than if you come to us and say, we want to add a wing to the building, or add some additional scope, which happens, like additional scope gets added, and then we would go through the same process on that particular scope. But we'll never come back to a client to say, yeah, we just missed this, or I know it was shown, but we didn't really have it, and our subcontractors cost more than we thought they would, or like that's our risk. That's the process. CM at risk. Everything is open book, as I said, and the way that our contracts are written from a public procurement standpoint is all of the savings goes back to the client at the end. And some clients will spend that on additional amenities through the process, and some try to maximize that amount of savings to get a check back at the end of the process. So it just varies from client to client. So all of those things we believe lead to the best value. And again, when I say best value, I mean the very best way for you to spend the dollars that you have available in this process to truly meet your big picture outcome in a way that it does that at the best possible price, essentially. So with that, that's it. I'm open for questions. Go ahead.
First question is kind of a curious. I don't think I need to know it as a committee member, but do doors fall under you talked about the bifold doors. Does that fall under equipment or specialty in your graph here?
That would be actually under finishes. It can be seen as enclosure, but in this particular case, I think that line item is under finishes.
Finish. All right. Thank you. Next question. We talked about possibly combining if we're doing new construction to save costs. I guess the question that probably is going to be for Chief is, if we do combine 4 and 5, 4, we own the land, we're ready to go. 5, have we even started negotiations with the state? So is that even a possibility of combining the two at this time, being that in my view, 5 is still out there if we haven't even started negotiating?
Well, remember, we're at the earliest talking about, we'll be at an election in November. The earliest we'd be eligible really for any spending from Stifel? Did I do that? Hard. Stifel. Like this time frame, March, April, like when the first actual can sell your bonds and things like that. So if everything lined up and we were ready to go, I mean, if really we were that ready to go, the earliest we'd be starting would be about a year from now. And let's see if that can even happen that fast, or we would even want it to happen that fast. Well, the bond has to pass, although we still need to do something. The bond doesn't pass, if that's the way they go. We still have a need. We still got to figure out how to do it, and that's the kind of the plan B part of this equation. So that the needs don't go away. So whether or not we'd want to tailor those to try to line those two up, if they're looking like they're got potential to align or not, I can't see that far in the future. So I don't know we're ready to
But
say they will or won't.
We
match
have
up.
to address Station 5 anyway, because obviously in 3 years, we're done at our current Station 5. So no matter what, I'm gonna throw out there that you need to design Station 4 to accommodate folks from Station 5, because that may end up where we only are.
Well, to be clear, the lease is up in 3 years. We're not that we're out of there. I know you weren't able to make last meeting, but we're not out of there in 3 years. It's just that we have to renegotiate a lease, and the Garland family was nice enough to at least let us know that they've got some options. I don't think that in 3 years, if we're they won't close the doors and we need to redesign. I think we're eligible to stay there up until the time that we need to, and so hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years.
You mentioned earlier in your comments that there may be some economies of scale by combining 4 and 5. What savings based on your experience, can you estimate? Are we talking about $5 a square reduction, $10, $100? What are we talking?
That's a good question. You know, it's going to vary depending on the project, depending on the time of year, depending on. I don't know.
What I would say is the factors that are going to be impacted are general condition costs for one. So as the CMAR is responsible to manage the overall process, there's some economy in being able to do that jointly from a project management standpoint. So that would represent itself in the general conditions and just not paying for as much attention in two separate scenarios. It's almost could be treated like one job. Now, if they're totally separate in terms of the timing, that limits that ability. The other thing is the ability to, if they're able to be put up to bid at the same time, then subcontractors can look at it as just like your point was, what's it going to take to get my workforce there to build these projects? And the more volume, the easier that burden is often in those scenarios. And then there's also an intangible piece of it, right, where it's a client, architect, contractor relationship. There's lessons learned through the process that can be directly, immediately employed in another project. So I think there's some intangible things that would play out through, but to put hard dollars to it, I'm not sure we could probably do that.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, would you, if you were at least going to bid on being a CMAR person for us, would you recommend that if the stars align, the finances aligned, that we do combine them into one project?
Yes, and that's based on other experience. So right now we are just starting pre-construction on Northwest Fire District project, which is there's two stations together, and I think the reason they did that was for that very reason of just the efficiency and the ability to work with the same team to make decisions on both of those projects, and so that's a benefit. Do you have something to? James.
I'm actually working on the Daisy Mountain new fire station 145, as well as their new admin building. And one of the kind of package benefits that they get, like Seth mentioned before, is you have a $4 million job for the fire station and a $2 million job for the admin. And rather than having, if they went at separate times, you'd still need a project manager for both. So with them combining that, they were able to just reduce it down where I'm the only project manager. We've been able to reduce project meetings, which are saving on the architect's time, because we have a meeting, 2 meetings on the same day at the same trailer. So we're able to make the project a lot more efficient and cut those. Same with submittal packages. Through the negotiation process with all the subcontractors that we've brought on board, we were able to package it. If you get both jobs, what's your number? Because when we initially priced everything, we went out and they priced them separately. But through the negotiation process, when we brought them in, we were able to say, if I give you both jobs, what can I take off your number? So there were savings there.
I think, if we're talking high level costs, maybe with subcontractors in particular, like the instance that James was referring to with packaging things, maybe 5 to 10%. At times, I think it just really depends on your situation. But there are advantages, like maybe one trailer, at one site, and using that for your main hub as far as meetings go and things like that. So, is that, yeah.
Couple things. First of all, I just before we close the discussion on this, I don't think that we should assume that the stars are going to necessarily align like they did for Daisy Mountain, because we're dealing with another higher level government agency, and I think that puts some unpredictability into the equation. However, if it works out, that's great.
Right.
But my question probably is to the chief, and that is that I know that on Station 5 we were talking about possibly building in some capacity for state employees to stay there, whatever. Is that in this number?
Well, I'm not really sure what they bid on station number 5. We had this discussion the other day. What this is really conceptual. So
Yeah,
maybe you
number
can help.
5 was a very conceptual, high level. We were told 2 bays, and we were told similar to right now it's being served out of a 2,600 square foot station. I think the apparatus bays, if you were to do a 2-bay, would be about 2,000 square foot alone. As far as future build out, you've got an additional 2,500 square feet that you can kind of design as flexible as you want it to be. It'll be your priorities that will play a factor in what goes into that station.
So then, I guess my question is, the 5,500 square feet for 5, does that include some capacity for these other uses, Chief?
I would say, I'm trying to remember the drawing that we had from Pearlman back then. I think it was like 4,700 square feet, only like 2 dorm rooms. We need more than that. I think there would need to be more room to
Okay, so
house
this
other
is
folks.
strictly the fire
This is-
station side.
This is fairly, from what I understand, this is just the fire station side.
Okay.
Good, we're not required to build space for Coconino or, I mean, that's not our job.
No, I know that, but there was some discussion about incorporating some state uses into this facility, and I just wanted to make sure that some of those costs were not included in these numbers.
Right.
No, I don't believe so. I
No,
think
we
that the
didn't have-
5,500 square feet would be to serve mainly your needs at that particular station. So for your fire admin.
Correct.
Any other questions?
I have some questions. So if you could just, I noticed looking through your book, you've got quite a few Dallas fire stations. How's the relationship there that you've built so many Dallas fire stations?
That's good. Do you know, Nicole?
Well, let's see, in Dallas, we do have quite a few stations. We have more stations than that we have built that are not in that book, but I work with our national marketing director to pick a couple stations just to show that our national reach. So trends happening in Texas, for example, there's a LEED Platinum station that was recently built in Texas that I believe is in that book, which means, it's an amazing thing, and you don't necessarily have to have a LEED Platinum certification to design and build that way when it comes to sustainability. But I called and spoke with the team on that project just to learn what are the air quality, the different tasks and the different ways that you handled this project to ensure the highest level of air quality for the firefighters that this house was serving, because this is a huge concern all over the place, all over the nation, right? And as it should be. So that was, so anyway, that's an example of just one. So there are more. We have fire stations. We do municipal projects all over the nation. But everything's relationship-based, really, and qualifications-based. So in Texas, we did a really great job. So we do have quite a few in Texas.
So you didn't bid for like all those projects and got all those fire stations that were kind of more, as far as you know anyway, but you don't know the answer for sure.
Good question. I guess I don't.
I think they were separate.
Yeah.
numbers, but I just don't know enough about those.
It just speaks to me that you're doing a good job then if you've built that many stations in a large city that, that's just, it tells
Yeah.
me something about your quality of work. I just didn't know if you got them all in one shot and they're just stuck with them, or
Yeah.
if it's,
All one job. Well, yeah, I don't know if the year is listed there or if
I'm not sure, I
the
skimmed through it real
clients,
fast.
But anyway, yeah, no, I don't believe so. I believe that they are all separate. That's probably a fair
And
assumption.
you've done 17 fire stations, you said, in Arizona in the last 10
And those are just new build stations. We've done quite a few renovations and smaller projects. So within the public safety world, a lot of PD and everything. So just full blown new build fire stations, 17 in Arizona.
Last 10 years.
In the
or
last
so.
10 years.
Yeah.
Hey, Chief, real quick. You mentioned the LEED certification. In your experience, how much does that add to the cost of something like that if we want to pursue something like that?
Yeah, I think that today, I would say it doesn't, other than some of the increased management aspects of it. It depends on the circumstances, but there's often ways that now some of the projects that we build could achieve LEED. They just choose not to go through the bureaucratic documentation process. But what are the most important decisions when you're designing and building a building? It's designing for sustainability that actually produces some sort of value in the project, whether that's in the quality of experience or in the cost of operating it. And so that's usually what our focus is on, is how can we help make decisions and guide sustainable decisions that are producing either a no cost difference or a very quick return on investment that can be shown or documented.
Yeah, just one thing to add to that. As our codes change throughout the years, they're becoming more and more stringent on energy efficiency. And so, like the 2012 IBC, when that came into effect, that had a big, significant impact on our building envelope and the insulative properties that are required. And so, as we see those codes getting more and more stringent, that difference between having a actual lead project, I think diminishes. And I think having just a LEED certified building is very, very easily achieved without, I think, adding much cost. It's as you start getting into maybe the LEED platinums and the LEED golds that you really start having to add additional features like maybe solar or water harvesting or geothermal, other methods that may increase the cost more significantly, but yes.
Just looking through this book, something caught my attention. I guess it's going to pertain to number 4. I see that Pine Top, it looks like Dallas number 10, without really getting into the other pictures, are all, their bays are actually not drive-through bays. So is that still a possibility? I know 4 is really tight, and we are trying to design it to where we can do a quote-unquote drive-through bay, but I see in these new builds that they're actually the bay, a backup bay. So is that still a possibility? I guess, would that be for Chief, or?
So we definitely prefer a drive-through bay. There's just safety and efficiencies there that we prefer a drive-through bay, and probably more of a standard practice for folks to not have to back in, especially in uptown area specifically. Lots of people walking through there, having to back up, get out, block traffic, things like that. Create some good efficiencies for us. So Station 5 maybe doesn't need a drive-through bay based upon our location, and there's no people that are going to be backing, walking through the area, things like that. It might become less of a need, and again, a best value, or go ahead, if you put the drive-through bays, again, a construction, an architect that goes, yeah, you want drive-through bays because the fire chief said, I think we need drive-through bays.
Right.
And a contractor goes, just so you know, if you wanted to back into that station, you could save X amount of money. I never thought of that. Maybe that value now becomes, let's back in the bays and save X amount of money. And that's the dialogue that you'd have in a
Right.
CMR relationship versus a group of design folks going, yeah, we want this and we want this, and they just design what you tell them because that's what you're the customer, that's what you want.
Right.
May not be the best, but
Yeah, I think that the drive-throughs are always more ideal, safety, and for several reasons. But the majority of the time, in my experience, that I've seen them not be drive-through bays, it's mainly because of site constraints. That would be the main reason. It appeared Station 4, the conceptual design that I saw, they were able to do drive-through bays. The bays seemed somewhat shorter than maybe ideally, or other stations that I've seen. They're a little shorter because of that turning radius you have to factor in on that such a small site. But it does appear that it could be done on that site, in the preliminary
okay.
sketches that I saw.
I don't have any other questions for core construction myself, and I don't know, we wanted to follow up their presentation with Chief Pichura's got a little flow chart or a scorecard, if you will, to kind of go through the projects and kind of try to prioritize a little bit of this stuff so we can understand really what we're looking at from a standpoint of how do we fund all this stuff? Because as you saw here, you've got $10 to $12 million, high and low estimates. You talked a little bit about adding $1 million on if you wanted to go with the.
Are we saying goodbye?
Yeah,
Well-
we just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity. We would love to, help in any way we can moving forward. So.
And I'm assuming you're still going to be here. You're not running out the door
We're
quite
not
yet.
leaving.
So
We'll
I figure
be
they'll
here.
still be here if they have any more questions that do
Yes.
pop up. But if we want to talk about, the 10 to 12 million plus the $1 million for the garage, plus the added cost of which you spoke to, Board Member Ernster, for the fees and the extra $1 million that they were talking about roughly, Those are starting to add up some numbers. We haven't talked about fleet and we haven't talked about telecom. And so Jeff will explain what he's kind of done to help kind of mitigate some of those costs in a shorter window, and he'll explain that. So I'll leave that to Chief Pichero.
Good morning. So, in kind of going through the notes presented by the committee and on creating some sort of decision package, we went through the list of projects that we're pondering for a potential bond question. And we narrowed it down to the projects that are listed in the scorecard that was handed out to you today. The total projects for buildings, fleet, and the telecom, those specific items listed, $17,051,000.
Does that include the million? Yeah. Does that include the million?
No,
Does that include the million?
not for the maintenance bay, no. So, the IT project piece is just a culmination of a lot of the other projects, along with the 2 towers that would be in play for Station 4 communications tower replacement and Station 5's new tower. Should that be built, we would need a communications tower there to make sure we're talking up and down the canyon. So those are those cost pieces in play there. And then just lump sum projecting that you'll see in microwave system, backbone systems. The public siren warning system is replacement of the system that's up in the canyon, been in the canyon for a number of years. It's outdated already. We bought it. It was in boxes for a while, installed it, and it still wasn't supported. So Bob's been eBaying parts. The vendor actually just came back online, so he's buying some other new parts to keep it going. But there's some different ways to notify the public, and we're working with that one, and the county as well. So those are the project pieces. So the idea is you have 2 score sheets. One is a category sheet, and I would seek your guidance. And again, this is a guidance document. It's not the decision pack per se, because in some of the conversations you've had is to let staff prioritize the projects moving forward and get things aligned. Your scoring will help us in guiding our decision-making processes in the future. So the first page is categories. So the buildings, if you would just identify those 1 through 4, 1 being the highest rating priority, 4 being the least. Again, with fleet, you saw a fleet sheet of about $3 million, Chief, is that right? About $3 million. And going through our capitalization plan and discussions we've had before, if we can get these 5 units up in the pipeline, we can balance the other items with cash purchasing, pay-as-you-go kind of approach, along with the capitalization of the capital improvement plan that would be funded on an annual basis, predictably, and then drawn from when needed.
Do you have the additional 10 to 15% pre-construction costs in this, or should we add that so the total project cost is really closer to the?
So the numbers that are in the buildings are the high estimation number.
But that's without the pre-construction.
It's about,
that we just brought.
well, it's about $1.2 million in high number, from the low to the high. So the thought could be is that if we don't want the maintenance bay is like from the annex piece, a do it or don't do it as we prioritize what facilities we want to update. We could work within those numbers to accomplish what we have. Noting that Station 5 won't be a Taj Mahal. It'll be a nice looking outside building, but it's going to have efficiencies constructed in it, so it won't be the high end. Station 4, it's got to be a nice looking, it's on a tight package. We've got some unknown variables in the ground that will probably push the limit on that high estimate to get it in play and make it work well. We can add another $1 million into the bond package, but again, it's another $1 million in the bond package. You'd have to ask the voters to ponder that. So that's an option.
Well, I get that, but if we're going to ask, we should ask for it all at one time instead of just coming back again and going, oops, we really blew it by not going on the high end of the cost and hoping for some of the low ends to offset it, like you're kind of saying.
Gotcha.
So
I just don't want to be short-sighted.
So I think we absolutely have an opportunity to consider, the maintenance bay being $1 million piece of that as an option that isn't shown here. So we certainly have that option as a need, especially if we're gonna renovate station number 1 in its full capacity. Back to your question, Dave, if we decide that, the maintenance bay stays, we can't get all the rigs in there that we have, but we'll make do with it. We'll figure it out. You guys just have to live, deal with it. Then that 2.5 doesn't become 2.5 anymore if we just do the operations side of things. So there's a lot of variables and things we need to prioritize and figure out. So there's a lot of unknowns that we're trying to get through. And to say simply add another $1 million at the end of this, so don't take that lightly at all. We could certainly do that and end up at an $18 million bond request, because you want to do it right. Or, as we're going to see in Gabe's presentation in a little bit, can we absorb this through our funding of our capital improvement project so that we don't come up short after this bond period's over? And there might be some opportunities to capitalize some of that money and do a hybrid back to kind of your pay-as-you-go in bond, and we're getting both, because I heard someone say, we're at $20 million. If you were to fund that remaining million into fleet, Telecom talked about a $3 million number, but there's some other capital items that we're also pay-as-you-going in there. So, yeah, we would be well over $20 million if we were to capitalize everything that's on the capital plan that could be capitalized, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that staff is ready to say that's a great idea, even though we want to make sure we don't half-step this. We want to also be practical. And so whether it's 15, 17, 18, and with purpose, those are great conversation points.
So, Chief, back to my question, and I'll just ask it one more time because I'm still confused on what the correct answer is. For myself, the maintenance bay is a high priority for this station. Making the troops a little bit more efficient and what have you is probably the next priority. Your office is, frankly, the least priority.
I agree.
Is there a way to prioritize the remodel of Station 1 in that manner and bid it out like that? Or back to, are we basically saying if we do the east side, we've got to do all the east side, and if we do the west side, we got to do all the west side? Or is there a way to modularize it and say, let's do the maintenance bay because we're basically going to scrape that old shed away and rebuild and put that, and then let's come over here and let's get the troops fixed up, and then maybe your office can come out of pay-go, something along those lines.
Ileana's got something she wants to add.
I was just gonna say, if you guys need, things broken out like that, if you'd like admin broken out from fire, we'd be happy to provide that for you. That's not a problem at all.
So,
If those are,
Yeah.
what your priorities are, that wouldn't be an issue.
My priority, not necessarily the group.
The group's
so
priorities.
Dave does not want me to have a new office. I got that. Okay, clear.
You've
Check.
got a nice
No.
office.
No, and so that's something as staff we've really tried to work on a bit, and so I know a neighboring fire district was in the process of doing exactly this for an administrative building, and they were looking at hey, this, and they're gonna have to build a new building. It's gonna be this so much a square foot and all this stuff, and they're in a different commercial type area, but they were able to find an actual existing vacant building, buy it for what was going to be a $2.5 million probably build or something like that, $3 million build. They bought it for 1.2 or 3, something like that, and they're looking at a $400,000 or $500,000 construction, and they're building it for, it's 14,000 square foot building, so they're somewhere in the area of 110 a square. So my question to the $1 million maintenance facility, we've not looked at this point. We may go, hey, at the end of the day, for $1 million, we could go down the street and there's a guy selling a maintenance, something just closed, or whatever, and maybe we could buy something there for a lot less and serve our purpose. Or maybe we could realize that at $1 million, we could take this and, find a different solution that wouldn't require $1 million building. Those things are not on the radar yet. We're looking at them, but we don't have answers yet. And now that we have a number, it helps us at least identify the value of which having our own facility versus maybe contracting it out, or looking at, again, sharing a building, or maybe the city decides we need to do something with our, fleet, and we could build a building for both of those, agencies. I mean, there's just a lot of unknowns at this point. So this gives us a good starting point. And absolutely, in the least of the priorities, I will tell you, is the chief's office. But I will tell you the efficiencies and functions of the administrative office to house and manage and create a good working environment for our administrative employees is a high priority. Is it less of a priority than the folks getting out to a quick response to save someone's life? Yeah, absolutely. But I think having some efficiencies to where we can work does have some priorities. My office is we're actually looking to downsize my office, so I want to be very clear in that. In the design, we're actually losing space in my office, and I'll have the smaller offices of some of the folks. So,
Yeah,
I'm on
I
the same
don't think
page.
anybody's diminishing the importance of the administrative or the efficiencies and the good working environment for the administration. I think when we're just talking dollars and bondable dollars, what's the priorities?
Correct.
And so that was kind of my point.
Absolutely.
Gene?
Has any consideration been given to consolidation for maintenance, fleet maintenance, and so on with an adjacent community such as Cottonwood?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes.
And
No. So,
He's a man of
everyone,
many
so
words.
I would tell you that our maintenance budget is 2 to 3 times the combined maintenance budgets of the other agencies. And they use private contractors for their light and all the way through light to heavy maintenance. They don't have on-duty mechanics. So as a shared services review, we've done that. We actually created an RFP for light maintenance items that the group hasn't moved on. So it's not necessarily a high priority for those folks because they have just limited budgets. And to do a shared maintenance system that most agencies do, they just don't have the wherewithals to invest into it.
thank you.
Lonnie?
Chief, thank you for this worksheet. I'm starting to fill it out, and then I went and I paused and going back onto my philosophical, as you called it last week. As a committee, is this? Yeah, I'm just going to talk here. Is this my job to prioritize this micromanaging? Whether 4 or 6 engine gets, that's not my job to that's your guys' job. I feel it's my job to listen to everything, look at the numbers, and should we bond just the buildings and possibly the renovations and the fleet and telecom? Leave it up to you and the board to figure that out via the budget. So I'm just at a pause right now whether I move forward with this. To me, it's micromanaging the whole situation, which is not my job, and I'm not going to micromanage. Is whether station engine at station 6 is priority 1 and the water tender at 5. That's obsolete. Whether I put $1.9 million, authorize that into the bond, or not authorize, give my opinion to put that into the bond, is why I'm here. Am I off base?
So, no, I hear you loud and clear, and we prefer not to have you micromanage as well. So, but what we are seeking is just your inputs and insights to see what lies in the community's mind are important topics foremost, and then we can put it into our processing piece to see, okay, well, this scored really low on the committee, but based upon the priorities of the ring, the network, or whatever, we think it's got to move up, so we're just going to move it up. We appreciate the inputs and insights, but we're going to move that up. The prioritization of facilities and alike, we're hearing you loud and clear that we need to have options relative to the priorities of some of the facilities like Station 1's piece. And if we were to be limited by a number that Mrs. Maxwell brought up relative to maybe just adding $1 million for the maintenance facility, and Dave is passionate about it, is through those priority pieces that Ileana noted, we would just say we wouldn't do something or we downsize something. Station 3's project is a culmination of a lot of stuff going on, from new pavement to updated roof structure where the sag is, to egress through the bay air or through the dorms down into the bay quicker, and some seaming in the bay areas, downstairs office stuff. So there's some pieces to this whole thing that we don't necessarily have to do in some of these facilities as we move money around to make it work and make it fit. And that's what you pay us to do, to make it work and to manage it and prioritize it and report back to the fire board is here's the ideas and concepts, have the fire board provide inputs and guidance, and then approve whatever's on the plate. So, Lonnie, we're just seeking insight and input, not your delegation of or your delegating of responsibility back to you to say, make a decision for us.
All right, thank you. I think I'm hoping Gabe's presentation will help me in this prioritization, I guess call this. To me, it's this buildings, fleet, and telecom. That's where I personally would like to stop prioritizing this 1, 2, and 3. You've subbed it down to 16, and if I have to do that, I will. I'm looking forward to seeing Gabe's presentation on the fleet and telecom. I mean, I make it no secret, philosophically, does that need to be in the bond? Can we do that via the budget? And so that's, I guess we'll just hold off on after Gabe's presentation and see if it answers my question.
Gary?
I noticed that we talked about the tower replacement. Has that turned out to be more of a reality? Because the last time Bob was here, it was kind of, you know, not quite sure depending on potential outcome, or has something changed since the last conversation, or is it just reality is setting in?
So Bob and I talked about Station 4, and that's the $1.2 million tower replacement item. It will someday have to be replaced in the next 10 years. Whether we get vendors to do it and participate as partners or not are two questions that we have to consider as a business piece, and which is the best way to go. Best way to go meaning we control the asset and the property and who goes on it and for how long, versus somebody building it for us and then we're bound by their gift and whatever comes with it. So it's in there. If it happens, we'll build it, replace it. If it doesn't happen, there's 1.2 million capacity in the system that would help other projects that over time, if we're waiting 10 years to put stuff in play, over time we'll have increase in cost.
And then I kind of agree with Lonnie a little bit. I mean, I don't have a problem dealing with the buildings or the fleet, but, you know, even though I've been around a long time, I kind of look at the telecom as critical as a whole. And I find it a little difficult to give them 1 through 7, you know, on that front page and that same issue. So I'm going to, unless it causes a problem, I'm going to group it together and I'll let you guys decide. Because, you know, unless we could pick Bob's brain a little bit, I'm not sure where everything is.
Sure.
You know, so that's where I'm kind of at. Just
Gotcha.
so you know.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we don't want a short-term Band-Aid, we need him to tell us.
Right.
So, you know, the other piece, so when I look at the 2007 results, you know, they prioritized the 8 or 10 items that were on there, which ones had a higher priority or lower priority. I think Station 5 was a higher priority. I'll have to look at this. Going by memory, it's been a while. Anyway, things change. So back to the micromanaging piece, we appreciate that. We don't need or want, you know, this is exactly what you need to do, but having some ability to at least get a feel for what you guys think. You've been listening to a lot. It helps staff who will make the ultimate recommendation to the board. I mean, you know, take your recommendation and what we know about the project more intimately, and help make a good decision as to. And so I hear you loud and clear about the grouping of them all. I think that has some value. Number 16 doesn't mean that it's the lowest priority. I mean, it's just got the lowest number, but it still needs to be done. It doesn't mean that it doesn't get attacked at some point. It just helps us identify that, hey, you know, buildings are the most important thing for you guys, and telecom became the third most important, or apparatus, or, and we talked a little bit about whether or not, how that was gonna actually look, and would you be able to actually prioritize those? So we've had similar conversations. We're trying to make it at least quantifiable for staff, so hopefully that we didn't create more confusion. And
Who's that?
That's Lonnie.
Chief, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One's to Chief Pichura. Did I understand you correctly to say that the pre-construction costs, the design and engineering costs are in this $12,156,000 number?
The design costs are not. These are estimates on the construction piece.
Okay, so
itself.
that would have to be added into someplace along the line.
That's,
That's the 1.2 that you
Yeah.
would be
Right.
added to that.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I thought, okay. And then the other comment I would like to make is that I feel the same way as Lonnie and Gary, that it's hard for me to necessarily rank order telecom. But I guess there's some of these I would question whether or not they belong in a bond program. For instance, the $50,000 for the siren warning system. We approve projects like that, you know, every month on the board agenda, and it seems to me like something like that could be pulled out of this, and if you could somehow work that into the operating budget at some point in the future. And there might be a couple others here like that fall into that category.
So, first of all, some of these systems are going to last a while. The siren system, 15, 20 years. So there's some method behind the madness of having future generations pay for that system for future warnings. The other piece, and Gabe's going to go into it, is how we fund our capitalization and what those levels would need to be on an annual basis to build the fund appropriately and still put all these systems in play. And so that's what he's going to hit next, and that will answer part of your question there.
Okay, and just another quick comment on the radio tower replacement, the $1.2 million. That was also my understanding in previous meetings, that it wasn't clear that that was a requirement at this time, granted at some point down the road, and that's just one that kind of struck me as, since we really don't know for sure what we would do or what would happen in the future, does it make sense to include that into the overall bond program?
Yeah, it's a good question. The point would be, how would we fund the $1.2 million if we took it out of pocket, or we made a business decision to state that we will have just sole ownership and responsibility for it for $1.2 million?
well, that's why you have your 5 and 10-year plan, and then we start with our capitalization, your funding, so you plan for that.
Certainly, but then you are increasing your fund balance piece on an annual basis, including taking more tax dollars to fund that. So it's, you know, pay me now, pay me later. It's the way to at least provide long-term funding system mechanism for it without going into the general fund base, which is a limited commodity.
So I want to reiterate that the $17 million that Jeff, and we kind of did, we took out, there's a Type 3 engine in there that's $400,000 in our capital plan that's not in this plan. And we took out, you know, other things that were in, like the whole enchilada. We've taken some of those pieces out and said we need to cash pay some of those to help get that number down. And so whether we take the $50,000 of the public warning system, that's easily, you can take that out and fund it.
So
You know,
you've
not, I
already
say easily
done
meaning,
what we're asking about.
right. You can easily take that out, or, you know, the microwave system at 250 is probably a couple different projects all lumped into one headline is $250,000. So moving that number out, or even the 225, the 250, any of those numbers, we can facilitate back into what Gabe's going to talk about now in a minute. It just becomes, which ones do you plug in, which ones do you plug out, and the bottom number. So let's remember that the bond question will not say, will you fund a microwave system and a public address system for the canyon? It'll be, will you fund, you know, do you approve a bond, a general obligation bond for public projects for the Sedona Fire District to include capital projects such as buildings, fleet maintenance, buildings, infrastructure, whatever, and all those legal things that have a very broad scope. And then we as the board will ultimately decide what gets funded out of that bond if it meets the intent and letter. So it won't be specifically this, and this. It will be broad and not even by category, $7 million in fire stations or $12 million in fire stations and the balance to go to other stuff. It'll be all encompassing for any of those things as priorities change. And I just found that this piece of paper. So Chapel Area Station was number 1 back in 2007. Oak Creek Fire Station went from number 5 on their initial priority list, however they did the initial priorities, to after the presentation was done, it went to number 2. A communications center went from 2 to 3. And then a news station from Uptown went from 3 to a 4. It got kind of downgraded even after they were done. And a fleet maintenance went from an 8 to a 5. So even in that committee during that time, maybe Karen, you remember how that went, or Gary, you might remember, or Lonnie, you were there. However that went, that priorities changed even in that committee or wherever. 10 years later, we've done the Chapel Station, which was number 1 on the list. We no longer need a communications center. So we're talking about the Canyon and Uptown.
Same too.
The Canyon had an Uptown, or a Canyon had a higher priority then. Does it have a higher or lesser priority than 4 today? I don't know, not really in my
Well, we
mind.
didn't have it fully staffed either. We decided to staff it continually, and that helped alleviate some of the emergency.
So,
But number 4 certainly is top priority.
And back then, as I recall, one of the issues when we talked about the canyon is the lack of available property.
Right.
And so part of that concept was, you know what, if a piece of property comes up and is available, we need to jump on it. May not be able to build a fire station, but at least we've got the dirt to start with, because that's one of the biggest challenges up the canyon.
so I appreciate you at least thinking about how you would or wouldn't prioritize, and if this committee would like to go a different direction. Jeff worked on this over the weekend, and so as much as we'd hate to not, take what he did the work on, if there's something you as a committee feel would be better just to prioritize, the hardest part is they all have to happen, like I said earlier. So it's not a matter of, well, number 16 just isn't going to happen because it's a low priority.
Well, Chief, I feel that him putting this together for us is great, but it's not the priority of you guys decide that. It's really helping us get the numbers so that even though you've pulled them out and we're going to be talking about what's going to be capitalized every year, this is really the minimal number to keep us going and to help offset between bonding and pay as you go. I get that.
Excellent. So with that, I guess unless there's any other questions, we can see what Gabe has to enlighten us with here, and we'll go from there.
So, thank you, Chief. So that's really kind of the point that I'm here to help you guys drive home is what is it that we need to go to bond for? Not specifically, do we need a microwave system? Do we need an IT system? Obviously, you need to know those things so you understand what the needs and purposes are. But really the question is what's this committee going to recommend Sedona Fire District bond for? Stations, equipment and fleet, telecommunications, all of the above, one of the above, two of the above. And so what I want to try to illustrate here and what I was asked to kind of be able to show you guys is what are the various impacts of taking things out of our operating budget and putting it on the bond side, and how does that impact us, and how does that impact us from a capacity standpoint? Ultimately, the list of needs is frankly much higher than what our available means are through the normal tax levy based on our current projections. As you can see from my report here, when we start with the mill rate at the top, we go from 253, which is roughly what we're going to be, what the board is going to be considering to adopt this month actually, all the way out to 26-27 of 335, which, as you remember from my previous meeting, is 10 cents over our cap rate. So obviously there's components in here, if we are limited to just the operating levy, that we are going to have to cut from this plan because it's not doable. Yes.
Just real quick, that example you just gave, and that projection all the way out is based on doing everything pay go.
Correct.
At what fee, at 15 million, 18 million?
So what it's based off of is the full 17 million plus all the other items that are already included in the district's capital plan, as well as what it includes, and this is where Chief Pietruro alluded to that I was going to discuss, is changing the way we do business. Again, Sedona Fire's done a very good job managing their finances over the years, but there are some things that we can do better. And one of those things that we can do better to fall in line better with best practices is to actually truly develop a capital fund and develop a funding mechanism within that. And so this right here is that development of that. And as you can see at the very bottom line there, actually just above the very bottom line, the capital budget, we're funding 2.5 million to that capital budget every year. Now, obviously, there's pay-as-you-go purchases coming out of there. There is lease purchase payments coming out of there because obviously 15 million in stations, 12 million in stations, we're not going to be able to pay cash for right up front. So there's the lease purchase cost of that in there. But there's also that funding mechanism for our capital fund. So when we do come to the future point where we do need to have another large station project or another large infrastructure project, we've built up the cash fund balance to be able to pay for that stuff when it comes due. Or at least be in a place to be able to kind of gauge a little bit more to, do we want to reconsider a bond option? Do we want to consider lease purchase? Do we want to consider the cash? Whereas you can see here from these projections, when we get out to that 10-year mark, we're no longer, that decision ability is gone because we're outside of our cap rate. So here's what we have. This is essentially we buy everything, pay as you go, through the levy, and no bond. And you can see that just under mill rate. Just under mill rate, you'll see that the bond rate is 0. So, and then when you see the variance from bond, that's essentially what the increase in total levy is, or total tax rate, I should say, compared to if we do a bond. So you can see, if we don't bond, sorry, Tricia, if we don't bond, it's actually costing us, 2 cents more not to bond. And the reason for that is the term of the debt. If we bond, our term of our debt goes out to 20 years. If we lease purchase, most banks won't go over 15 years on a lease purchase. So that's why we're seeing a difference there in the impact to the levy. When we turn around and take the bond into consideration, and we go to bond, I was on the wrong screen, that's why it wasn't working. When we go to bond, you can see that our mill rate actually drops all the way out to the 10-year mark down to 3.14. And as you can see what that bond rate does, it changes as our assessed value grows. But then you can see the savings is roughly 2 almost 3 cents, but averages about 2 cents over that 10-year window. So that is, but this is now showing the full $17 million bond as well. So this is everything in there. And I think this is the point where, Chief Ed kind of said, can you give them kind of these different scenarios? And I'm like, well, it sounds like there's a lot of questions on multiple scenarios. And so this is where I kind of want to take the input from the committee, and then we can kind of manipulate this data and show you guys what the different impacts are. Does that sound like what the committee's looking for?
Hey, Gabe, real quick. With this example of the bond, is this for the 17 million?
Correct. That is
on
for the
this spreadsheet?
17
Okay,
million.
thanks.
And I want to illustrate too, down at the bottom there, we still have $1 million going to capital. And what that $1 million is again funding our regular smaller projects, which again the discussion about the $50,000 alerting system, that could be funded through that as well as continuing the philosophy of development of a long-term capital improvement plan that provides a growing fund balance to be able to address future capital needs and not have that reliance upon the bond or peaks and valleys in the mill rate to fund a big project one year and then drop it down the next year because we don't have a big project.
The assessed evaluation?
Yes.
In one of the prior presentations, we talked about good, bad, and
Right.
not too bad type.
Right. Right.
Which is this one?
This is the not too bad.
It's not the aggressive either, though.
No,
It's-
no, this is out of our projections. We looked at best case scenario, worst case scenario, and what we really kind of truly believe we're going to see, and this is what we truly believe we're going to see.
So, the only thing that, because I'm not very smart and I'm also here to represent the folks out there, is there a way, or did you already break the two charts, the pay-go chart versus this example, towards that 345,000 average household? This is what it's going to cost me to, if I pay-go versus if I bond.
Yes, I did. And you'll have to excuse me, it doesn't look as pretty as that does up there. But here is, this is a little bit behind the scenes here on all the formulas. But right here is that residential property. So here is what kind of the pay-go is. Let me take it out to this year here. So pay-go, here's kind of the cost of at $9,000 compared to the bond in the same period of time, which just the bond rate would be $6,500 for a difference of right here. Basically, the difference over the life is for that house is $314,798 on the commercial property and $144 on the vacant land.
304, I can't see from here, 314, not 314,000.
Correct, $314. Yeah.
Savings doing a bond.
Pull out that, is it the pay-as-you-go, though? Can you go, you're missing, I think, two categories. Go back to the pay-go formulas for those other last 3 years? No? The pay now, or is that not, no?
No, so and actually the pay now that I did here is there was, I heard a comment about just bumping up the levy to cover the cost of the stuff. That's what that pay now is bumping up the levy to cover the cost, and then the rest is just funding through the budget.
I think what Chief is asking is underneath residential pay now, it stops on year 23, 24, and you extended the,
Because the pay now actually funds the 17 million in capital projects at that point.
oh, okay, so it's paid off at that point.
Yeah.
Because your mill levy goes
That's
up.
max in
Correct.
the mill rate.
You're maxing the mill rate to pay it off.
So go back to the total again, over the total, the life of this 10-year project, how much am I gonna pay? I'm gonna pay,
So the average homeowner is going to pay $315 more under the bond than they will under the pay-go.
For 10 years.
Over
20 years.
over the 20 years.
Correct.
That's a cumulative number, the 314.
Correct. That's a cumulative.
Yeah, so you're gonna pay $954 in today's money, or $1,269 over 20 years. So in
Yeah.
a what are the first? What's that? 954 over how many years through 2027? So not 9 more years.
No, actually, the 954 gets paid off in.
Oh, and that's 6 years or whatever that is.
It takes 6 years, yeah, to pay for the 954. So it takes 6 years as the increase the mill rate, pay for this stuff now. It'll take us 6 years to bring in enough tax revenue above our operating budget to cover these costs, and then compared to putting it in the 20-year bond.
And letting everybody for 20 years pay for it.
Correct.
Which is the point, having everybody in the next 20 years, not the people that are living here in the next 5, pay for everything. So we
So
want to
you-
share,
So you amortize that $314 difference over the 13. Well, the difference of the 13 years or whatever it is. It's-
$13 or something
yeah.
like that?
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
So you get to.
Well, right here, you could see, this is what bond tax these people are paying in those years. So it's $26, in year 19 for just the bond tax.
For your 2030 8.
Yeah, and then you hit year 20, it's $15.60 is just the bond rate that they're paying.
Did you see the difference there when you talk about that amortization?
Can we get a copy of that sheet there?
I'll
Thanks.
clean it up and make it a little more presentable.
So back to your question, Dave, was is it cheaper to pay as you go? So if you wanted to go that route, we increased the levy, and for the next 6 years, everyone who's here in the next 6 years pays for everything,
Exponentially.
and then we ride for free the next 13 years.
Correct. So technically, it is cheaper, but it also puts a burden, a heavy burden,
Heavy burden.
on
On the existing.
on the
population.
existing folks, which I think is probably not fair.
Right. And that's the key. What you're doing it by doing that method is it is cheaper. It's going to be cheaper because we're no longer borrowing. You know, either every other scenario we're borrowing money. So once we start borrowing money, we've got interest to pay. So the other scenario is basically would be very limited borrowing, very short-term borrowing, to achieve those goals.
And what would happen to these numbers or the interest rates if, based on the priorities that ultimately the board directs to the chief and the public, assuming the public votes for a bond, what if, this is all based on 17, what if it is 15? Or what if it's 20?
Okay, so give me a second and I'll show you that.
As you're pulling that up, that's a very good point, Mr. Waters, because we've already got $1 million more for the maintenance shop. We had another $1 million plus for unseen cost with the pre-construction cost. You know, so we're pushing 20 before we even know it here. So that's, you know, that does include portable radios. That includes, you know, a lot of stuff here that philosophically I have questions on, but everything that's on this paper, and we were at 20 before we know it.
So while Gabe's working on that, what we're looking at is if you look at the bottom of this one that's up here now, the line from the bottom, the $1 million capital. So we're right now looking at the one that says if we bonded the 17 million. We're putting in $1 million in here, and what I don't know if Gabe has calculated is what is the running balance of our capital fund at funding that at $1 million. But if we fund that at 1.2 million every year, and we're putting $200,000 more away every year, which is a levy, right? We're taxing our folks today to pay for something later. But I guess if the principal continued forever, then everyone's paying that going out forever, which is maybe an okay thing, and it helps intergenerational equity.
But you're spending it, you know, you're planning on your equipment replacement and all that. So it's fluctuating.
It's fluctuating. So
How could he
in the
do that
years we
for
look
us,
at, on another sheet that we've kind of worked out internally, is, you know, one year we may have, you know, only spend 400 of that 1 million or 1.2 million, and the next year we might spend, you know, 1.6 and overspend it by 400,000, and then the next year we, you know, and so it's constantly varying, and after at the end of this we end up with, you know, a $2 million or 1.5 or a $3.5 million capital reserve fund in 10 years. That is putting the train back on the tracks for the fire district, so we don't end up having to come back for a bond, that we have money in funding for that. But you have to allocate that in today's dollars and be okay with this capital fund, and there's a purpose for it and things like that, and it doesn't get swept and used for other things like it did the last time, and create this opportunity. So if Gabe, I was trying to fill in there for you. I hope
Yeah, no, that was perfect. So, so if you can see here, this is still showing, because again, we've agreed that that there is a need for the full 17 million, but what the discussion is where does that get funded through bond or through levy? And so by moving that out of bond, moving 2 million out of bond, you can see it saves, we're at, I believe, roughly $3.10, or $310 additional cost for the homeowner. It's now down to 170 by dropping down to 15 million from 17 million. And then that correlating, you'll see the correlating tax rates right here. And you can see, if you remember, we averaged about 20. We end up down about 16 cents on the bond rate towards the as we get further out.
Can you do that same trick with assuming the 20 million?
Yes, I'll do that now. No, fill time in.
And is that mill levy didn't go all the way up to the
No, we're at-
top at that
we're at
point either,
3.1.
right?
No, again, because we're looking at pulling out bonds. Where we're going up to the top as if no bonds on the table. So,
And this one is at the 15, which we only got to 3.
So in a way, I guess the bond is like a bridge, because we realize that we've got ourselves into this position where we don't have enough money to really fund the needs, okay? And while we can debate on the needs, the point is that we need to come up with a bridge to be able to make that transition. So I would use in an ideal world, down the road, once the bond's paid off, probably the only time we would see bonding would be if we had to, I'm using the word build as in whatever, fire stations, because there would be enough money in the pot that would pull, some years we'd pull more, some years we would pull less, depending on the capital project. Vehicles a good example, because you looked at the vehicles, it was going up and down based upon the needs. So yes, there'll be some years where you'll put $1 million in it, but you may not spend all of that, because you know next year you're gonna need all of that plus a little bit to accomplish those goals. So I think the intent of the bond is to provide that bridge to get us over the hump that we're, because of where we're at today. Is that a fair statement, Chief?
That's very, very well said. And so I think the other piece that I kind of started to allude to is that if we, and we're just determining or starting to work on this now, is figure out what we're funding that capital project line item at. So we look at the budget here, you know, to go from 16.9 to 17.2 to 18.9 and all the way out. We're not seeing a huge decrease in the budget, but we're accomplishing all these things that need to get done. If you were to take and have to go and get that done, you're gonna have the budget's gonna go up that much more, right? Because it's happening outside, the bond is happening outside of the budget. Does that make sense? So you end up net similar, and that, here's his example here with 20 million.
So here's at 20 million, you see the cost, again, starting at our $310 additional cost, we go up to $561. And actually, hold on a second, forgot a formula here. If we're gonna go to 20,
Total over the 10, over the 20-year bond, yeah.
I need to make a apples to apples comparison.
Just gotta change.
So looking at those numbers, we're trying to figure out, is it 1 million, is it 1.2, is it 1.3? Do we, at the end of 10 years, do we want to have $2 million, in a capital fund? Is that a good balance where we are trying to get to? Last board meeting or two, Gabe talked about trying to get fund balances, more of the unrestricted fund balances, so it'd be a restricted fund. But if it'd help us be able to budget and do these things that we need to do on a much more smooth basis. Right now, we've been in the programming, we need a new fire engine, this, and this. And we've just been budgeting that with zero in the bank. This is more of a flat, let's equalize out our contribution and then use it as we need it.
And what was the decision on the fund balance? Where should it be?
We haven't got that far yet. Jeff, I don't know if you've got any insight. We were working with Tammy, another one of Gabe's associates, and we haven't really finalized where the right place is, and Gabe may have something to add to that, a best practice piece.
Chief, if I may, I know in the hotel business, we have standards that are, we try to put for reserves and for improvements and stuff every year based on our income. Is there a standard in fire based on, I guess it's gonna be based on your budget? Is that a 1%, 2%? You try to hold so much back for capital and stuff. Is there a standard on that?
I'm gonna again give that to Gabe to recommend if there's a number to put on that.
Okay, I'm good with this. It was good. So trying to do a couple things there at once, I'm terrible at multitasking. I heard, let me get through my thought here and then I'll come back to that one. So yes, it is the 561's, the difference in cost between the pay-as-you-go versus the $20 million bond, compared to $310 on the original cost.
So, what would, in year 2039, well, I guess we don't really know what the total fire district budget would be in 2040, do we?
No, it's.
I'm just wondering if,
I mean, I can give you a number, but I can give you a number, but it's about. Yeah, it's not.
So there's nothing.
There's no.
That's fine.
Yeah. So, so as you can see, it is additional cost going up to 20 million in bonding, and again, because there's that interest expense attached to it. Whereas pay-as-you-go, obviously, there's not the interest expense, but there is the concern from a business management standpoint of we've got a ceiling on our revenue, and once we hit that ceiling, there's nothing that allows us to go over that currently. So that's one of the concerns. I know the question was, what percentage typically is put away or put in, and the Government Finance Officers Association really doesn't give a specific number, but they do give criteria to organizations on how they should set that number. And we're roughly at the point where we need to be around 16% of our budget needs to be in fund balance, both for capital and unrestricted funds.
As a total fund.
Correct, as a total fund.
So annual input, for lack of a better word that can come to me right now, but per budget year, is there a percentage that you're supposed to be putting in every year based on that budget? I mean, you have a total. You told me that the total is supposed to be 16 or whatever, but is there an annual?
It depends on a lot of variables. It depends on what your capacity is, what you're able to fund. There's a lot of things. It's hard to say that you should be putting away X percentage every year, because once you gain that fund balance is there. It's about determining what that balance is, which we believe we've got an idea of what that number should be, and then now developing a plan to get there. Right now, we're getting hit with things like PSPRS increases. We're very fortunate on healthcare and workers' comp this year, but we may not be in future years that are going to affect our funding ability for those purposes.
So Lania, I guess maybe to try to put that in perspective, what you asked. So if we were a one-station fire department that we just built a brand-new building, we had a brand-new fire truck out back, we had 3 guys that worked here, or people that worked here, our capital need slide would look completely different than if you've got 5 fire stations, 75 firefighters, an aging fleet that has all different needs, you know what I mean? And you have 0 in the bank, or you have $1 million in the bank, how much you would need to save every year. Am I saying that maybe?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sliding scale. So we need to really get a good temperature on where we're at as Sedona Fire and where we're going to try to get us, I kind of call it putting the train back on the tracks and figuring out what that is. And we have not figured out, is a $2 million balance, a $3 million balance, is that where we really should be, so that in 2029, we realize that, hey, there's needs that we haven't even really put on the scorecard yet that we're gonna need an engine, we're gonna need this stuff. And if in perpetuity we continue to fund this flat level number, we'll be able to buy all that stuff. That's the goal, so that you don't have spikes in your budget. And that's what we have today, is we're pay as you go, and we need an engine, a this and a that, and air packs. And we're seeing a $1.7 or $1.9 million need, and then next year we might only need a $700,000 need because the way we spaced this all out.
And this right here illustrates what the chief is talking about. If you look at kind of come down here. So, essentially here is, our total capital expenditures year over year. And here's our capital expense. That's what we have in the capital fund. And here's, again, where our surplus or deficit is versus what we're funding to of the 2,500. And you can see we need to fluctuate our funding in these first couple of years while we get the plan going. But then as the plan starts going and moving forward, you can see now that capital fund balance growing. And again, so what these numbers ultimately end up being will be reflective upon, all the other factors coming into the budgeting process.
And there's no intent to grow that capital fund to $10 million. That's not, unless it's designed, because in the year 2050, we're going to need to build another fire station at $7 million or something like that, if we can even forecast that. But if that's what we knew we were going to need to replace, one of the stations that now is 50 years old at that point, or 45 years old, and we want to not have to go to a bond or whatever, we want cash to pay for it. That's the forecasting and planning that we need to be having today to put some fire chief and some citizens committee that won't have to be here in a position to go, the plan, this is what we're doing, this is how we're funding it, and figuring out that stuff. And, you know, planning to 2050 is a little bit far off right now, but 2025 is not. And so that's what we're trying to get to, and we find ourselves in whatever's happened in the last decade where we sit today.
I feel like that, I guess I'll speak for myself mostly, but I think most of the public doesn't really have a problem bonding 50-year-old fire stations. And so in 2050, when it's time to do this again or whatever, then I think the community would generally be, I think philosophically, as Lonnie has said, there's certainly some folks that are going, gosh, if we hadn't gotten so far behind, we should probably buy a fire truck out of operating, or something, you know, portable radios out of operating rather than bonding it. But we are so far behind, you're not going to get past that, so we've just got to figure this out now.
So if you were to look at that $15 million, well, look, it's probably already been changed, let's just say that as a separate worksheet, but if you look at that $15 million number, then if you got 12 at the high end, plus $1 million for the maintenance facility, plus the $1 million for the fees and things like that we talked about that wasn't incorporated, you're close to 15 million with a couple unknowns. And if you were to take that 15 million and take out apparatus and telecom, we can look at that. We would just probably need to kick up our, and I say just because it's that simple, right? But we'd have to kick up our capital budget funding by X amount, 300, 400,000, I'm making up a number, I'm not sure what the number would really be, but to get us so that we can then fund all those things, which would be then the taxing of the people today, so our mill rate will go up. If our mill rate goes up and our AV, you know, doesn't do anything funky, we, you know, we're moving towards the cap already. If the AV goes down anywhere we didn't predict it going down, it exacerbates that problem. That may be something that we just need to tolerate, and I think from the committee's standpoint, we've heard Karen say, and I think other people said, hey, if we're gonna go in, let's get the stuff we need to get, and get it with an intent to hopefully right-size it so we don't, maybe bonding stations is always gonna be something that we maybe just have to put on the radar, and that's a plan, a business plan. Do we grab any of those millions to help get us back on the track, or do we just go, hey, buildings, I'm good with that, let's go to 15 million, that gets enough of the buildings. Maybe there might be a truck in there if you get to the low numbers you talked about and make those decisions as a board. But that's if, you know, things are dialed in there, and knowing that we may have to increase the capital funding plan and just hope that we don't have a downsize in a downturn in the economy where the AV goes down 43% like it did last time, or 10% even, let's just say.
To kind of go on what Mr. Waters is saying, is, and Karen has mentioned also, Mrs. Maxwell, I'm sorry, is this bond is for 20 years. Everybody will be paying equally over 20 years, which I get and I understand that, especially for the stations. When you throw an engine in there and a water tender where the lifespan is not 20 years, is I guess where I start to question, is that, again, in my words, a bondable item? The
Yes.
stations, yeah, it's going to be, they're going to last over 20 years for sure.
So we talked about this, you know, and they would create the bonds, so those get paid off first, so they are paid off in the bonding, legitimate, you know, how the bonding is actually funded. They will be paid off in 7 years.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the water tender, the engine's expected to last more than 7 years. They're 15-year assets, 12 to 15, you know, that we're looking at. Hopefully with some, you know, some decent quality, we're seeing 15 to 18 years if you know, we see some good, buying some higher quality trucks, if you will, and the hopes are that it will last longer. So that is kind of where we're at with how you would fund it. So it is bondable by all means. You know, the beauty of the budget is it's of just a mathematical relationship between all these numbers. So again, if we take just buildings and deal with that, then we have to figure out how to get the rest squeezed in there. And squeezed in there means, how do we make it all work? We increase the mill rate in some cases. We can cost save in other areas. We can work diligently to do the best we can do, but when we get a $700,000 increase to PSPRS, which is nothing that Sedona Fire did, we don't have a negotiation ability to be able to not pay that. It has to get absorbed into our budget. If any other unforeseen surprises occur like that somewhere else down the line, we're going to have to absorb those things. And those just create things that we can't plan for. And we have an opportunity before us as a committee to decide. And if it's philosophy for the group, is it apparatus and telecom or not? As Jeff has done, we've already prioritized, I said earlier, some of the items. We pulled some of them out just to not, not get to 22 million or some, I mean, we're trying to be very fiscally responsible and make the best of what we can. So that's why you see the $17 million number that Jeff has. But we certainly can work through adjusting those numbers if there's a philosophical issue, or, a bond that doesn't pass doesn't get us anywhere.
Right.
So the needs still exist without the bond.
Just a quick question, Gabe. Under wage benefits all the way across the road there, it looks like we're going up 600-700 each year's ballpark. Is that, those are estimates, but what are we anticipating the increase there? More personnel, higher medical?
No, that increase year over year is just reflective of the annual step increases, as well as kind of the averaging of the annual benefit increases as well, benefit cost increases, I should say, just year over year. So we take a 5% inflation factor on that.
Chief, just kind of follow up on something that you said. I've been on the fire board now for, gosh, I guess it's been almost 2 years, not quite 2 years. And just in that short period of time, there have been a couple of big surprises, $500,000 surprises that were totally out of our control. And I've never seen any surprises happen that are to our benefit. It's always, we're not saying, oh my gosh, we have a $600,000 savings because the state was kind. They gave us some. That doesn't happen. So my observation would be that no matter how finely tuned your projections are and your forecasting is, things are going to happen that we just can't predict. And so that's kind of influencing me with my thought process as we get further down the road. But
I think staff would be recommending that I'm speaking right now for staff, but there's some sort of hybrid. I don't think we can do the whole enchilada, like I said, and put every heavy rolling stock piece and every telecom project in. And so Jeff's attempt at the 17 million, pulling some things out and trying to, fund some of the items and things like that. Whether you do the 3 water tenders or you want to take the 3 water tenders out and put in the type 3, that's 400, take 600,000 out and put 400,000 in for the type 3. We can play with those numbers all day long and find a sweet spot for somebody. But I think they're really, to be responsible and again, to put the train back on the tracks, there has to be some hybrid of some of those things. Not all of them. I agree that we just can't afford all of them. It's just not going to work. We're going to have to pay go some of them. But finding a sweet spot that they were comfortable with, whether it's 17, 18, 19 million dollars, or 15, 16, and where and how we go that, I don't, that's, we need to figure that out. But I think to get to what you said, Tim, is that we do have there's always a surprise moment. And what we have in here is a moderate growth AV. We have no surprises in a downturn in economy in this either, really forecasted. I mean, we have some realizations, if you will, but there's not a downturn in that economy. And we have to prepare ourselves with plan Bs if the downturn economy occurs and trucks, we just can't replace a truck, then we just have to appreciate that we're going to spend more on maintenance. And that's just an incurred cost that we're going to have to deal with and things like that. So if that's what happens, and those are the unpredictability pieces that Tim spoke to. But I know we can't take a $700,000 impact from PSPRS and then bond that. That's not a bondable item. We have to absorb that in the budget regardless. So, Jeff, am I saying anything else? Am I missing anything else on kind of where we talk about with staff and the prioritization of this stuff? the reliability, when stuff's out of service and 2 or 3 units are down, there's again a cost to that, which if we have a downturn economy and we just say, well, we'll make trucks last 25 years now, that's great, but when all 3 of the trucks are broke, we can't show up on big wheels and roller skates.
We did get a positive surprise on the health insurance. So there was one positive surprise.
We're down
Was it workman's comp or was it health?
2.3. We're 2.3 right now, down in the last 2 years in healthcare. So, you know, where we were with some significant savings.
I do want to speak to that a little bit. It was a little bit of a surprise, but it was also a lot of hard work
Yes,
by
very
everyone
good.
involved in that. I think maybe the assessed values was probably the bigger surprise.
Yeah, seeing over 5% is kind of unheard of now after Prop 117. So
And so you can see that growth rate up there. I mean, the 4, the 2.5s to 2.5s to 3s. So there's no zeros in there. You know, when we change one of those out to a 0 or something like that. And Gabe, can you do that in there without, is that, if you change one of those 3s to a 0, just what would happen in 2023 if those were zeros? I don't know if it's all done, but you'll just see the dramatic impact where that just went from 314 at the end to 323. You know, the 9 cents difference on the mill rate, right? It's just by one of those being a 0, you know. So you just see that that's how the whole thing is kind of riding. And if we get a 3.1 every year instead of 3, it's going to drop another penny or 2 off of that. I mean, like it's such a variable thing that we just don't know how to predict fairly.
It is. Chief, I was just playing with some numbers here, and for example, I took out 2 fire engines. Well, with the maintenance facility, we're at 18,051,000, and then I took out the two fire engines, and anyway, it ends up being worse with the 15% surcharge or management fees that will get added to all this kind of stuff. We're still at 19 million. I
Yeah.
mean, it's big.
Are there any more questions of Gabe on his presentation?
This is Gabe. Gabe probably will be back to see you guys again, and we can provide some sheets if you have any other comments or questions. This sheet, you can provide this sheet or even the, Gabe's got good sheets.
Good.
So, take this stuff here. You can play with it however you want. You can see where the budgets go. It's just, again, it's a mathematical relationship. But anything else that you want to see from him, the plug in, take out, you know, if we're trying to decide between 15 and 19 million or whatever, I mean, how it really impacts.
Speaking of sheets for us, sight impaired, can we have that in an 8x14 piece of paper? Yeah, you had one like that.
It's
Yes,
11 by
very nice.
17.
I like that. Something bigger.
okay.
Please.
Digitally too would be.
Yeah.
Digitally would be awesome.
Digitally would be nice also.
So we can play.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you for.
Thank you, Gabe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
for-
Yeah.
Good presentation, Gabe. Thank you. Okay, we are now, unless I'm mistaken, we are on item number 9. And we have 2 board members, 2 committee members who are not present. Wendy's gone, and then Gene also had to leave. He had a family issue that he had to tend to with his wife. So I guess my question is, how much time do we want to spend on number 9 without 2 of our committee members here? Would this be something that maybe we should postpone until the next meeting, this discussion? Or Chief, is it critical that we deal with this today?
This is the letter.
This is the discussion, possible action, draft report of summary and recommendations to the Sedona Fire District Governing Board for long-term capital project funding needs, item number 9.
Well, that's really at your discretion. I know we want to try to get that done. We also did not really discuss item number 7 very much. We wanted to go to 7 and talk a little bit just about the general overview. Captain Rodriguez is not here, but committee member Eberline will speak to that. And we can catch this afterwards, you know, but I just want you to know we do want to come back to Greg if we can.
I could hit that real quick. I'll take a few minutes because I know we're getting a little bit late. But, you know, the mission of this committee was really to evaluate our current and future capital needs, and then to determine what financial methods that'll meet those needs, and then to have a recommendation to give to the board. And so that's sort of the finish line that we're getting close to reaching. And I want to speak a little bit about what happens after we as a committee reach that finish line. What happens if the board decided to go forward with a bond? And we spoke a little bit about it, and I want to keep kind of a high overview, but basically what happens when something like a bond goes through, and looking at what Daisy Mountain did to be successful and Golder, is that a political action committee, a PAC, is formed. And then basically that PAC is oftentimes made up of people that were on the committee because they have a lot of knowledge of the hard work that was done and everything like that. It doesn't have to be, but it's basically people that are in favor of the bond and see the need for it and want to continue the process through. So that PAC is formed, and then there's a lot of things that are involved in the election as far as getting fundraising involved to be able to do pamphlets or handouts or whatever is decided to do, you know, ads in newspapers, things like that. And those things are more of the pro stuff. And then, you know, as the fire district, we can only speak to factual things and stuff like that. That's not part of the actual election, but just the factual stuff. So I just want to touch a little bit on the PAC, the election process. Again, there's going to be deadlines and things like that to form the PAC, and different milestones. And I don't want to get too buried in the details because we're on time. But I did also want to kind of segue into something that Chief touched on, that you know, we're coming to our finish line, but sort of none of this matters if the bond isn't approved, because we've all agreed that these are our needs. This is probably the best funding mechanism to achieve those needs. And to speak a little bit more to my personal opinion is, you know, we have $17 million on here. However, Chief was sort of painted into a corner in a sense, in that very, very early on when we started talking about the bond, he was asked to, well, how much do you think? And we didn't have any idea until we've started going through this process, you know, and even getting CORE involved. And, you know, $15 million was thrown out there. And I think that's a pretty good number. And I guess just one of my concerns personally is that to be successful in a bond like this, is the citizenry now, if we go and ask for $18 or $19 million to get everything we need, going to say, well, we're already asking for more? And that's just something I wanted the committee to consider when we're moving forward and making a recommendation to the board on the amount, because again, none of this matters if it's not successful. We have to find other ways to meet these needs, because the needs don't change. It's really the financial way to get it. So do you guys have any questions for me on the political part of this that happens afterwards, the election part? Okay.
Well, how many people can be on a PAC committee? Is there a number?
As little, as many as you would like, yeah. And unfortunately, Wendy's not here. You know, she's been a part of PACs in the past, and she's very knowledgeable and very good at it. But I just sort of want to give you the overall view that the work for the bond is not even close to being done yet. This is just sort of the fact-finding mission to present to the board. So.
And if I could just tag, I tried very hard to try not to pigeonhole us in a number. I said it could be 10, could be 15, could be 20. I don't know what the number is going to be, but you know, 15 is a good starting point. But so it was just trying to be very, very clear that we didn't know what the number was, and to be as organic as we could in this process, because I don't know what construction prices are. I you know, took a stab at, you know, what that is. And so anyway, Greg's right on. So we got to message that if it becomes a different number. But I think it's also, the facts are what they are, and I think it's very messageable with the intent behind it, if that's where we decide to go, you decide to go.
Yeah. Well, I feel that, you know, there's a lot of information that that wasn't available to you, and certainly not available to the committee until we heard the report from Core Construction about actual construction costs. And I think those numbers are probably, they surprise me. They're a lot higher than I would have expected, but they are what they are, based on some pretty solid information from your experiences building other fire stations. So I don't want to feel like we're handcuffed into the $15 million number. I think we should have the ability to pick the number that we feel is most appropriate to meet our needs in the future, and to just arbitrarily say, okay, now it's $15 million because the chief blurted that out either 3 or 4 months ago. I didn't really mean that, Chief. But,
I
but
tried to
I think
hold
we
it
need to
in.
make a prudent fiscal decision and one that takes into consideration the needs of the fire district. Maybe it is 17 or 15. I don't know what that number is, but I would hate to be locked into the $15 million number when we know that it's probably not the right number. Gary?
I mean, I felt it was beneficial to have a number because it was kind of hard to make decisions in the sense, or hard to evaluate it without understanding the potential cost of a bond. And I think that number was like, I use it as a benchmark, okay? So, you know, if the amount was going to be X, this way we're not trying to come up with a fabricated number, but the issue being is it gave me something to look at, to say, what would the mill levy do if it was 15 million? What would the difference be, you know, just using that 15 million? So in a way, it's like a benchmark. And then at the same token, when I look at other numbers, oh, if it was higher, well, at least I have that benchmark to say, well, at 15, it looked like X, so at 20 or 18 or 13 or whatever the number, it's going to look, I can kind of adjust that in my own mind and use that as a tool to help make a decision. So I understand the challenge when you put that out, but I think if we didn't have that, it probably would have come up and we would have asked for something. And so, you know, so I see that number as a benefit, not as that's the number we're shooting for.
Yeah,
like Gary
and I
said.
didn't, sorry, I didn't mean to say that we need to do 15. I was just trying to say that we, especially Chief, we didn't have this information really until today to be able to do that. My perspective, though, is that the public that just reads the newspaper saw a certain number in there, and they don't come to these meetings, and they don't have the education that we all got. So that was just my perspective. If it's 18 or 19 that we decide on, that's great too. I wanted to be able to discuss that with you guys and just let you know what the citizenry may be thinking, you know, that only reads the newspaper. Yeah, correct. There's going to be a lot of education involved going forward for sure.
I agree. I think there will be a lot of education, but again, bringing it down to the Dave Waters level, because I'm cheap and I'm not very smart, I really think that Gabe, the scenarios that he can create for us, let's assume a $20 million bond, and here's how it works out. Let's assume a 15. But if we assume a 15, we've already identified we've got 20 million in expenses. So that means 5 is going to be pay go. What does that do to the mill levy? And just throw out, I don't know, however many realistic, and Chief, you can probably help him come up with those scenarios so that we can project this and show the public, the listening folks out here, here's what the various scenarios are going to cost. And it helps us make the decision, and it helps them see why we made the decision. Because we've got, the needs are the needs. We've got $19, $20 million worth of needs. One way or another, it's got to get paid for.
Correct. So, and Mr. Board Chairman there, or Committee Chairman, if you want to get more detailed on, I think we're hit 7 pretty good, unless someone else said anything. With that, you go back to your item 9, how you want to craft that or what you want to direct. I mean, having a couple, actually got 3 members missing, right? Because Pat's not here either. So, but the time is of the essence, as I spoke to last week. If you'd like, we can move the board, instead of making a recommendation at the May 17th meeting, we could have a special meeting on May, 21st, or May, we just have to have a decision by July 10th to the county. And I really want the board to be able to get your recommendation, have time to hear it, and have time for the public to have input before the board makes their decision. And so how that happens, I think, is really critical to the process.
I noticed we have 2 meetings next week, one on the 8th and one on the 11th, I believe.
That was available time, right?
Those are, if we needed to, yes. If you wanted to do that, we have 8th and 11th to try to help finalize what I was figuring would be this letter piece or whatever. And the 11th, I'm sorry, the 15th would be another meeting if you needed. So we do have 3 more meetings available if you felt you needed, what time you needed, or beyond that if we have to. I don't want to, as I said last week, I don't want to rush this process. It's too important to rush it. And we have ability as the governing board to have a special meeting if they need to get the information and process it at a later date. They love to come to meetings, so.
I'm sure.
Tim, Mr. Chairman, I feel like that based on some of the information CORE provided us, that there is a finding of fact there that needs to be added to the recommendation. And so we've got a little tweaking, and Tricia really, I believe she said she didn't really have too much time to fix my mistakes. So maybe we could have this part of this week to add to the draft letter, and Tricia can maybe have time to fix it, and then we can jump on this next meeting.
So the 8th is Monday.
The 8th is Monday.
Is that too soon? Should we not do Monday and just go to Thursday? Or do you not want to do that?
It's your meeting. Whatever
Well,
you'd like. I love meetings too.
It's
so.
really what the committee would like to do. My feeling is we should do it on the 8th because we may need that extra meeting, and I hate to lose it, yes, absolutely. So I would suggest we do the 8th.
So
And then we all should have that 11th meeting on our calendars. So, but how does the rest of the committee feel about that?
I'm good.
I'm good with the 8th.
I'll be here.
Does the committee have any input? I know Dave is kind of drafting this letter, and is it just open blanks? Or, I mean, is there any opportunity, at least with the folks that are here, as it relates to the,
I'll go on record. I've glanced over this preliminary draft from Mr. Waters, and I think he's done a very nice job. Quote unquote mistakes that he's made, I think Tricia's going to find very few. So I'm very happy with this preliminary draft, starting to plug in quote unquote hard numbers now
Right?
will help move this process forward very quickly. So that's my opinion on this.
And getting those examples or things from Gabe, is that possible this week, Gabe, to get a couple of scenarios, or is that really hard or expensive? I don't want.
we won't let him leave till he gets it done.
All right. Well, I didn't know if that was going to come out of Chris's pocket or exactly how that.
Yeah, the answer is yes. How quickly this week? I've got a case with another client that's going to trial at the end of the month, and we've got exhibits due the end of this week. But I'll make sure you guys have something by Monday. Is that okay if we do no later than Monday?
It would be better if it was a little bit quicker, because then we can incorporate some of the scenarios and information into the findings of fact, if you will.
Okay.
But if it is, it is. Well, it would be better if it could be
Okay.
even
Right.
Friday or Saturday.
Okay, we can do Saturday for sure. No later than Saturday. Well, I'll try to do sooner. But I don't want to disappoint. So set the bar out there, and then.
And to be clear, you're not on trial.
No, I'm not on.
Okay, just checking, making sure.
Not yet.
Okay.
So it appears there's a consensus on the committee to postpone item number 9 on today's agenda to the 8th. And that'll give Mr. Waters a little more time to refine. By the way, this was an incredible report. You did a great job on this.
So I guess the only thing I would ask before we postpone this agenda item, helping, I don't know, maybe telecom and fleet, is there any, I'm hearing mixed concepts as to where we should be at, and instead of giving Gabe too wide of a range to really give all these scenarios, if you will, or do you want to just plug in, I mean, how do you want to give some direction to him so he can create those scenarios? Does that help? Does that make sense?
Well, I'll go first, just again because you probably, in reading the draft report, I put a couple of my own biases in there, which is that under normal circumstances, I would like to see, I think engines would normally be a pay-go kind of a thing. I realize that we're under, and we may not be able to do that, and I didn't really word it all that well in my draft there, but still, in looking, we've added $1 million to the maintenance here that wasn't in the numbers that we had even last week. So I'd say if I were asking Gabe to give some scenarios, I would say leave the telecom, because I think that's a priority, and this is just my priorities. Leave the stations, and pull, say, $1 million, or what do we got here, about 1.2 million of fire engines out, just as a scenario. And so, and leave the 1 million for maintenance in. Again, just kind of plan. We've got $20 million here we have to spend, and I don't know how the best way for him to do this, because if he pulls that million out, does the mill levy, the annual operating, go up to the point where we're not really saving anything?
Right.
Right. So why don't I do it this way? Let me propose this, because I think we essentially achieved the same goal, but we'll just move the dollars around on where it comes from. But if we do a scenario with 15, 17, and $20 million bonding, I can then manipulate. I mean, I'm not going to specify what specifically is getting paid in from that, but show we can reduce $3 million off the levy if we're doing 15 million bond. Or I'm sorry, add $3 million to the levy if we're doing $15 million bond, and take it off if we're going up to a $20 million bond. So we're effectively going to get the same thing of showing you basically 3 different scenarios, or even 4.
Expenses will always be the same 20 million, or because
Right.
we've got to spend 20 million.
Right.
Just how we spend it.
Exactly. So exactly. So we're spending the 20 million, and then I'll give you the 3 different scenarios that shows what that impact is between each level, both regular tax rate, bond rate. So
Awesome.
That's
okay.
perfect.
All right. I'm not gonna be able to get that to you by Friday. Yeah.
Ooh. You bring them up to the table,
Because
we gain a
we
day.
don't need to know how many trucks or which trucks or.
No,
that's
Right, exactly.
That's all in the weeds.
Yeah.
that
Right.
You guys can
Yeah.
figure out.
Right.
Okay.
So what I'll do is do the 15, 17, and 20, do that cost comparison, and do that average homeowner comparison.
Perfect.
So, all right.
That'd be
Perfect. And then, as a committee, if we so choose to go with the 15 million, then on these priorities right here, we haven't really, we keep using the word need. Is Station 1 and Station 3 renovation needed, or is it a want? I've never asked that. So I think if we come up with that number, then it's up to you and you as the board to figure out what's truly a need.
the priorities, you mean?
Yeah, and a,
Because you're not asking us if we think Station 4 and Station 5 are top priorities. As a board, you're just asking for the dollar amounts to spend towards.
I think
That?
the committee thinks it's a top priority. It's 3 and 1 that everybody's a little.
Right.
right.
And I think the board is interested in the committee's findings about what are the higher priorities and what are the lower priorities. I think the board's interested in that.
I think we all should.
So, yeah, and, I guess if the roof falls in at Station 3, probably was a priority.
Right?
Whether we create an ADA accommodation and create some efficiencies in the design of that station that saves us 5 seconds of response time for the next 25 years. If you're the benefactor of that 5-second response time, I bet you think it was worth it. And if you never call the ambulance in in the next, you could care less. You know what I mean? You don't live in Station 3, never go to the village, you'd never then it really won't impact you. So it's all really perspective based and,
But Chief, is it possible, and back to court, I already heard her offer the ability to, as we talked earlier, kind of provide some estimates, modularize things, how much this is going to cost and that, and not do this. Could you do the same thing with Station 3? The roof is going to cost this much, making this ADA or putting in a lift here is this much, and so then you, as the guy that's responsible for all of this, can say,
yeah. And you can have that by Wednesday?
By
Thursday, you can beat Gabe. If you can beat Gabe, I can just beat Gabe.
I'm not even sure we necessarily need that information for our report, it's information that would be really good for you to have.
Yeah, but if it helps us understand, are we looking at 18 million or 17 million? I mean, it may have some impact. Now, I mean, if, at the renovation of station number 1 is pegged at 2.3 to 2.5. If we end up
Three's
saying, you know, wow, to do all that is really, you know, what's the value of, again, back to the mechanics bay or whatever, what's the value of its 1.5 million to do the admin side? Well, geez, for that kind of money, you know, is there a new office building down the road that we can go rent space at or something? Or is there a better, you know, give us some benchmarks to try to figure out, is there a better way to go about that in total? I mean, Station 1 was more expensive renovation than I would have expected the cost, and so was Station 3 by all means. So there's a couple $1 million in there between the two projects that I wasn't aware of as far as a realization of cost. So now that we have that number, like you said, today is really the first time we got these, you know, Friday, or yesterday, I forget the days run together, for the first time as well. So, you know, we may go, yeah, you know, that's really nice, but not a have to have. So give us an opportunity to maybe break those numbers out as well and determine, you know, and so anyway, so I think that would be beneficial to get them sooner than later on both of those projects. The have to do's and then the nice to do's, so to speak, so.
I like that better. Wants, needs, and desires.
Sure. So, and then it also allows us in bad economy times to be able to evaluate, you know, also go, yeah, this is if things were good, we could do this and it makes sense and it's right and there's growth. And if it gets stunted and we have a downturn in economy and everything gets paused again, then it may create a different vantage point for what the needs are, you know, and the problem with our business is it doesn't change. Our business, it's not like in the economy where if it's down, you have less customers come to your business and less, you know, people in your hotel beds, which decreases your, you know, your maintenance and decreases your laundry and all those other costs that are related. Ours are pretty much flat all the time, regardless. And in some cases, in down economies, it could go up. Our
That's
needs-
a very valid point that I'm glad you put on record. That's very true.
You know, I have to say, one of the points that's in Mr. Waters' draft report that I think is really important is that every year, if this passes and we get into the mode of starting to spend the money, that every year in the budget process, it's really the board's responsibility to make sure that if there's a different way to fund some of these things besides using bond monies, then that's you know, that has to be a serious consideration in the process. So that just because the bond might be 15, 17, 19, or 20 or whatever, I think every year there's going to be some sort of critical evaluation of our budget, and is it really necessary to go sell some more bonds to build something or to buy something. So I think the number, whatever that number ends up being, that's not the end of this process. And I think it'll be ongoing every year as we prepare the budget.
Absolutely, and as they said, you know, we don't want to be selling bonds every 6 months. You want to go through the process of doing this. So we're making a decision at some point in the future going forward. Hey, at this point today, where the market is, where everything is, we believe that building a station, buying this fire truck, or whatever we're doing, and now we're earmarking that money in that bond sale. We're making those decisions at year 2, 5, and 8, and we know time sensitive, specific at that point in time, what our needs are then relative to where we are in the world. Make a ton of sense?
Yes.
And totally, if the AV's doing, you know, is doing this and we can cash pay a vehicle, I think that's probably the better way to go all the time. If AV goes like this and we go, man, there's not the capacity there, we better bond the vehicle, and it was just the only way we're gonna be able to afford a new vehicle. The bond allows us that, if we have that flexibility in there, and we do not have to sell all the bonds. At the end, if we leave 3 million in bonds on the table and we don't sell them, that's okay. That's not a problem. But if we need $3 million worth of bonds and it's not there in capacity, that's a problem.
Well, you know, there's a lot out of our control, especially talking about Station 5. If the state and the feds and everything falls apart on us again, then those funds change. We're just where we are and remodeling and doing whatever we need to do to stay there. So you're exactly right. But we need to have the funds in case we can move on that.
Correct.
I get that.
So I want to end with this committee that Sedona Fire District, I can speak for the governing board and absolutely for staff. We work to be as fiscally responsible each and every day in each and every decision that we make and each and every purchase that we make, short-term and long-term. We strive every day to be doing the right things right, our staffing levels, everything. I mean, it's not a come in and just do what we want mentality and just get all the stuff. It's pretty tight in everything we do. And so I want you to know, as citizenry, as a committee, and anyone that might be watching, the fire district, whatever thoughts, ideas, and urban legends are out there, the fire district is a very tight, lean machine that operates respectful of the citizenry and the taxpayers that provide the opportunity for us to be an emergency service in our community. And if a bond is approved, we'll continue to provide that level of care for every penny that's in that bond. And when opportunities come to cash pay or to create opportunities, as you spoke to, Tim, those are the decisions the board will make at that time based upon whatever the decisions are and whatever the economy's looking like going forward. And those decisions will get made. And we can't really make those here today. We can only decide what the bandwidth the bond will look like and the things we want to earmark. But if it passes, when you decide to go to a bond and if it passes, that's just the beginning, as you said, and we will work every day to make sure that whatever we get built, if we do a CMAR process, we are going to be, making sure we're building the right stations. And someone used the word Taj Mahal, those don't even exist in my world. It's a functional facility that provides good stewardship of the public funds and provides effective emergency responses. That's everything that I care about and that we work every day in this organization to refocus on and make sure that we present a sustainable solution for our needs as Sedona Fire District. And if and when that happens, that's what we're going to see, depending on if a bond is decided on, it passes, and how we move forward on. And so we'll work on getting those numbers dialed in Thursday, Friday, get to you guys. By Monday, we'll be having a great conversation. We'll try to firm up the concepts in Dave's draft letter that Tricia will finalize as well and kind of help package it up. The blanks with the numbers and things you figure out will determine what our next meeting schedules are. Is there anything else that we need to provide you as staff at the May's meeting besides the two? Okay. Well, then our agenda will be fairly short. I mean, at least as far as line item numbers, I don't know how long the meeting will take, but the number of items on the agenda will be short.
Did you want this?
Jeff left. He obviously, I don't know. I think we do want to get that information. If you don't get it now, you can email it to us or whatever, or call us and we'll fill out the numbers or whatever. But it'd be valuable to at least see that exercise if possible, to know where we stand or where.
Well, I'd like to keep it, but I'd walk next door and have you guys make a copy, and then
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we can do that. If anyone did it and knows where they're kind of at, or you need some more time, that's fine too. Scan a copy to us or whatever. And all right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Chief, real quick on that. So there's one collection point. You want them going to you or to Tricia?
I want them to go to Chief Pichera.
Copy.
Thanks.
On the 8th is at 1 o'clock.
If you don't have the chief's Ventur's contact information, you can
Yeah.
send it to me and I will.
Yeah.
forward
Okay.
We communicate really well up there,
it. We try.
and we get along.
We try.
Okay, so we've already discussed item number 10, which is the future meeting dates. So the next item is adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.